Hey there, friends. Tonight we have a collection of stories for sleep. This is the second half of January, so stories that came out earlier this year, just the second half of the first month of this year. We have trucker stories, strange and scary stories, divorce stories, and a collection of just other scary stories for you to enjoy. Hopefully, by the end of this, my friend, you will be sleeping well. I've been a trucker for about 18 years now, and I've always prided myself on being one that follows the rules, keeping me and others safe, but also being a good person. I've always been the kind of guy that stops to help stranded motorists when there's no sign of another person showing up for hours. I'll call in accidents, make sure that I'm taking my time on any turns and hills, especially when there are others around me. But there was one time back in my late 30s that I have always questioned if I did the right thing. It was late September and late into the night. Sometime after midnight for sure, and I was running behind schedule. I had taken a detour off of I-40 to avoid some construction, and my GPS routed me through a series of winding country roads that cut through the Ozark foothills. It was those kind of roads that rarely see any traffic during the day, let alone in the middle of the night. I had been on this particular stretch for about 20 minutes without seeing another car around. It was just dense woods on either side with the occasional reflective eye of a deer or something in the trees as I approached, always praying that they don't try to cross when I'm coming through. I know I was pretty tired that night. I was on my third cup of coffee between the instant stuff that I carried with me and from the last truck stop. That's probably the one bad thing that I do. I drink way too much coffee. And that's probably also why it took me a second to process what I was seeing when I came around a curve on the road. As I came around the curve, I saw a break in the yellow line, and that break was caused by something being in the middle of the road. It was dark, so from my distance, all I could see was a curved dark shape. The closer I got, the more into focus it became until I could finally make out what it was. It was a damn child's car seat. The kind that clicks into a base, sitting upright, right on the yellow line. Now, I've seen quite the array of items strewn across the side of the road, but a car seat in the middle of the road was new. This looked like it had been placed there. I had slowed down significantly, not wanting to hit it, but also wanting to get a closer look at it. And unless my eyes were playing tricks on me, there appeared to be something inside the car seat. It was kind of bundled or wrapped up. It could have easily been just a blanket or a doll or stuffed animal wrapped into a blanket, but I couldn't tell. Every instinct I had told me that I needed to hit the brakes and check it out. I really hoped that it was empty, that it was just abandoned in the worst place possible, but it felt like I needed to be sure. What kind of monster would I be if I just drove past? I had a young child at home around that time, and I was gutted with the idea of that happening to someone that I loved. My foot was already on the brake pedal. I was slowing down, expecting to drive by what I thought was debris on the road. But then, something stopped me. I had this creeping sensation that was starting deep in my gut. Something was wrong with this picture. There was more here than just an abandoned car seat. The fact that there was no other debris, like from a damaged car, and no vehicles on the side of the road, and not even any skid marks from what I could tell, made me think this car seat was placed here. But why would anyone do that? Who loses or leaves behind a car seat like that? So that's when it finally clicked for me. This whole thing felt staged. Deliberately placed there for a purpose. I had heard about similar traps being set up for motorists before, but had never run into something like that. I didn't have long to make a decision. My rig was loaded heavy and I was already slowing down. If I was going to stop, it had to be now. So I made my choice. Instead of braking, I jerked the wheel and swerved into the oncoming lane, giving the car seat a wide berth. As I passed it, I got a better look at it and could confirm that there was definitely something inside it. All I could see was fabric, like a blanket, but I couldn't confirm without a doubt there was no child inside of it, or if it was just stuff arranged to look like a child. I had made my decision already. I wasn't stopping. As I passed the car seat, I checked the mirrors again out of instinct, and that's when I saw them. 4 figures emerged from the ditch on the right side of the road, maybe 25 feet past where the car seat sat. They came out fast, running hard toward the road, toward where my truck would have been if I had stopped. I couldn't make out their faces in the darkness, but I could definitely see their silhouettes clearly in my taillights. 3 of them looked a little more built based on the wider shoulders, comparative to the 4th person. The 4th one was smaller and shorter, so I assumed it was a woman. But 2 of the larger figures had something in their hands. Something like a baseball bat or a pipe. If my heart wasn't already racing, it sure the hell was at that point. I gunned it to the best of my ability and didn't slow down until I hit the interstate. I may have almost been a victim of one of those traps. It happens to a lot of motorists on less traveled roads, but truckers are just as much of a victim. It takes us longer to accelerate and get away, which is why stopping can be so dangerous. I was probably driving for a good hour before I finally stopped at a truck stop. I probably sat in my cab for several minutes trying to calm down. Part of me felt sick with guilt. What if there really had been a baby in that seat? What if I had just left an infant to die because I was paranoid? But then, all I could think was if there was a baby, it had to belong to one of those adults that walked out onto the road, right? But what kind of person would use their child as bait? If I hadn't seen the car seat there, I could have easily hit it, or anyone that drove down that road, and then what? It made me sick even thinking about it. I did call the local state police from the truck stop and told them what I saw, and the approximate mile marker. I wasn't really thinking straight at the time. I was on a one-track mind to get away, so I knew that I should have reported it sooner, or tracked where it was better. But hindsight's 20/20. I did at least report it and let them know what was going on. They said that they would send someone to check it out, and I never heard from them again. I still have no idea if anything ever came of it. I've driven past the same stretch of road a few times since then, both in the daylight hours and at night, and I've never seen anything like that again. I still wonder if anyone else came across that same setup that I did, and if anyone was hurt. I still wonder if there was a baby in that seat, but most importantly, I just hope that there wasn't. Because based on what those people were holding, I don't think anything good would have come out of me stopping to check. Hi, Raven. I had a rather unexplainable experience when I was about 10. I'm 24 now, and I could never determine what I actually saw or what truly happened, but here is my recollection. I was at a friend's house one summer day, and we were there by ourselves. The house was rather old and definitely had negative energy, considering there was a lot of drug use, fighting, and other questionable activity happening there. It was a trap house, for lack of better term. For context, 2 of the bedrooms upstairs were connected via a long walk-in closet, easily 10 to 12 feet long. The bedroom my friend and I were in, bedroom 1, had full access to the closet, while the other bedroom, bedroom 2, had a sheet or blanket tightly nailed over the doorway of said closet for privacy. emphasis on tightly nailed. There was no slack in this sheet/blanket. It was nailed completely around and did not move. The doorway leading into the second bedroom was directly at the top of the stairs as well. Anyways, my friend and I were hanging out in bedroom 1. I was sitting on the floor directly in front of the walk-in closet, while my friend was off to the side. There was no light or windows in this closet, so it was very dark. For whatever reason, I looked up into the closet. I saw a set of very long, sharp black claws reaching around the sheet from inside of bedroom 2, about 6 feet from the ground. The best way that I can describe these claws would be like a mix of absurdly long human fingers and a crow's foot. They were black, bony, maybe 8 inches or more in length. They had long, black pointed nails, maybe 2 to 3 inches long. These claws pulled the side of the sheet back to reveal a demonic, animalistic-looking face. The details of the face are hard to remember, especially given how dark it was in the closet. I do, however, remember this creature opening its mouth wide as if it was hissing at me, but I don't recall any sound coming out. Even though the closet was very dark, this creature was darker. It was blacker than black. As soon as it seemingly hissed at me, the sheet was thrown back into place, and both my friend and I heard loud, fast footsteps running down the stairs. My friend, who didn't see the creature, automatically assumed somebody had come home. I told her what I had just seen, and we both agreed it had to have been someone playing a prank on us. We immediately went downstairs to see if anyone had come home, and sure enough, we were still the only ones there. This happened during the middle of the day too, so it confused me even more. We went into bedroom 2 to see if the sheet was loose on the doorway or if there was any physical proof of what I had seen. The sheet was still tightly nailed to the doorway as it originally was. There was no way that it could have been pulled back, as I witnessed, without it being ripped or loosened. We had tried to recreate the sound of the footsteps running down the stairs, but no matter how fast we ran, we could not duplicate the sound that we had both heard. The footsteps were so much louder and faster than our own. I have never witnessed anything like this since, nor have I heard of anyone having a similar experience to my own. I was the only one to physically see the creature, so my friend couldn't confirm what I had seen. If anyone has any insight on what this could have been, I would love to hear it. When Claire and I got married back in 2013, I thought I had found my person. She was a wonderful person. She was a third-grade teacher and talked about how she had always wanted to be a teacher since she was a kid. And she showed it. She was passionate about her work, her students, and she always came home with stories about the funny things they would say or the breakthroughs they'd make. The look on their face when they finally understood something was always so pure and fun to see, and I loved seeing her light up as she talked about it too. We spent a lot of time together, making sure to at least have one date night a week. We'd go hiking on the weekends, maybe try a new restaurant or go see a movie. We always found something to do, and for the first 3 years of our marriage, it was everything I had hoped a marriage would be. Then things started to shift, and it was hard. It started small, and she would snap at me over nothing, the way I loaded the dishwasher or how I put the dishes away. She would be mad at how often I cleared my throat, or how I drank from my cup. She blamed it on work stress, claiming the administration was demanding, that parents were difficult, or the workload was just crushing her. Whatever it was, I believed her. I gave her space, tried to be supportive, and just assured both of us that the hard times would soon pass, and we would have a few good days before it would happen again. but the good days would become fewer and farther in between. There was one particular brutal week where she had barely spoken to me except to criticize, and I suggested that she consider leaving her job. I made good money, and would even be willing to take on some more time if it meant making her happy and less stressed, until she could find something that she was happier with. We also didn't have any kids or pets, and our mortgage was manageable, so we would have been fine. My thought was that if that job was making her that miserable, then it can't really be a dream job, can it? But apparently that was the stupidest thing that I could have suggested. She made comments about how she didn't need me to take care of her, how she was her own person, and that if I tried a little harder, then she wouldn't be so stressed about staying in such a miserable job. I was stunned. We were more than comfortable. That is why I suggested it. It's not like we were living paycheck to paycheck. In fact, I paid most of the bills and her checks went to her daily and monthly subscriptions, between her magazines, our streaming services, and her daily coffee stops that she made. As far as I was aware, nothing was going unpaid. I just dropped it, apologized for suggesting it, and then never brought it up again. Over the next year and a half, Claire became someone that I didn't recognize. The verbal abuse escalated. I was lazy, I was boring, I was holding her back. She started coming home later and later, claiming faculty meetings or parent conferences and just too much work to take home, especially with me around, as I would just be a distraction for her. She even made me sleep in the spare room because my breathing kept her awake. Not my snoring, mind you, just my breathing. We were practically roommates at best, and hostile ones at that. Finally, one night, it took a lot from me, but I mentioned divorce. She looked at me like I had just insulted her and slapped me across the face. She asked me why I would even bring that up, that I was being a dramatic little boy and that I needed to grow up. So she slapped me and mocked me, but apparently our marriage was completely fine. I never brought up divorce again. I continued living my life happily on the outside. I told no one about our relationship. As far as they all knew, we were happy. But at home, I found myself in the living room until she came home, and then I would hide in the spare bedroom, where I practically spent almost a year of my life. Then I got a text one night that changed everything. I was home a little early on a Wednesday, and thought that I would try to do something nice for a change. I texted Claire and asked if she wanted me to pick up some Greek food for her. It was one of her favorites, and since I was home early, I thought having dinner ready might put her in a good mood. She responded, declining my offer, saying that she was going to be out late. Maybe that would be good too, so I got dinner for myself and lounged in the living room, thinking that I would go to bed when she got home. But then I got a text from a buddy of mine. It was a picture with text that said, "This looks just like Claire, doesn't it?" The picture was definitely Claire, my wife, at a restaurant about 40 minutes from her school, and sitting next to a man that I didn't know, with their arms all over each other, faces closing in for a kiss. My buddy that sent it to me was also a coworker of mine. He had a kid that was actually in my wife's class, and his kid pointed out to him, "Oh, that's Ms. K." He knew who she was, and I still appreciate him telling me, because I don't know if I ever would have found out. I waited up for her that night, and when she finally came home around 11 p.m., I was sitting in the living room with the TV turned down. I couldn't pay attention to anything. I couldn't think of anything other than that picture. All this time, she was miserable at home, but she was out, happy as could be with someone else. So why the hell stay in the marriage? I confronted her about it. She immediately tried to play it off, calling me jealous, claiming I was acting like a whiny child. And then I showed her the photo. That is when she changed her demeanor. First, the tears started, trying to guilt trip that it was the stress, and then she begged me to give her another chance, pleading and promising to break it off and that she would change. She claimed that she loved me, and that we could work it out, and then suggested counseling, something she had previously laughed at me for suggesting. But I stood my ground, and I told her no. I told her I was going to stay with my brother. I had already packed some stuff and crammed it into my truck. I told her that she needed to find a place too because I was selling the house. I didn't need something that big, and I knew that she wouldn't be able to afford the mortgage and all the bills on her own. That was hard. I had to call my brother and finally tell them what happened. He was upset that I was doing it all alone, but was glad that I had chosen to reach out to him. He was living in a small house by himself. Never married, no kids. It was back to being us, back when we were in college, which was at least a good time. I had better days, and slowly I became the person that I used to be. The divorce should have been straightforward. Again, we had no children, there was a clear division of assets, but Claire's lawyer filed delay after delay, missing documents, scheduling conflicts, requests for additional discoveries. Weeks turned into months, and it just became a silly dance with her. I continued to stay at my brother's place in the meantime, not wanting any new property or money exchange to muck up the divorce more than she was already trying to. But apparently the terms of the divorce weren't looking good enough for her, and she decided to try to take it into her own hands. I had been watching TV with my brother one Saturday evening after dinner when the doorbell rang. My brother answered it, but I could see the door as well as the officer and well-dressed man on the other side, making me sit straight up. And of course, they asked for me. My brother let them in, and they asked if there was anyone else in the home, and if we were expecting anyone. Then, the man in the suit, who turned out to be some kind of detective, asked about Claire and our relationship, and then specifically, our divorce. They asked if I had gotten any threats or confrontations, and I told him no. I was increasingly becoming more confused and alarmed, and my brother asks them what this was all about. Their reason knocked the wind out of me, and I will never forget it. Well, Mr. K, we've got credible evidence that your wife solicited someone to have you killed. I remember it just circling in my head. The woman that I dated, married, shared a bed with, a home with, she wanted me killed? The detective explained that they had an operation set up for someone unrelated, but she happened to come across their setup and also took the bait. So they got two suspects for the same trap. She explained that she wanted it to look like an accident so she could get everything. My life insurance, retirement accounts, everything in my will, all of it. And then she would have a clean slate to start over. All of this was documented by authorities, and since I was not the initial target, they had to track me down to make sure I was safe. And when they learned the story from my side, they said they could work with my lawyers, the courts, etc., to make sure that she would get nothing but charges. Unfortunately for her, I had already changed everything. I was already adjusting my will for some things, but after the night of the picture, I changed it all. Everything I had would go to my brother, my sister, and my sister's kids. She wouldn't have gotten anything. The charges came fast. She was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and solicitation of murder for hire, as well as a handful of other related felonies. The divorce was expedited after her arrest, too. She still tried to fight it from jail, but I heard her lawyer dropped her, and the judge wasn't interested in her delays anymore. She ended up taking a plea deal, and the divorce was completed, and I finally started getting my life back. Sometimes, when our anniversary or special dates go by, I do kind of still think of the good times. I wonder when she changed. and if there was anything that I could have done to get her back. To keep that Claire that I had married. But I know it wasn't just me. All she had to do was leave, but she didn't. She refused. And then the fact that she tried to have me killed, that told me all that I needed to know about what was important to her. I know this was the better outcome because I can't say for sure that I would still be here to tell the story if I did stick around, and if I had never gotten that picture of her with that other man. I have a really strange New Year's Eve story that may not be creepy in and of itself, but it's one of those stories that has always been on my mind. And to me, it was seriously freaky. This all happened about a decade ago. I think it was New Year's Eve 2010. I was a young guy living by myself in a cheap and pretty crappy apartment. 2 years prior, I had been in a pretty bad accident that ended with me getting a metal plate in my skull and needing constructive surgery on my ear, leaving me partially deaf. Because of this, my right ear only functioned at about 10%, so I had to get a hearing aid that kind of helped, but was also kind of annoying. I don't know if it was just the brand or if my particular unit was defective, but I swear almost anything would cause interference with it, and I was always having to adjust it. On this particular New Year's Eve, I was alone, which wasn't a big deal to me. I kind of liked just spending the time by myself and doing whatever I wanted. I made myself dinner and was watching the news so that I could watch their party, or whatever it was, leading up to the countdown. A while after, somewhere close to around 11:30 or so, I was watching TV and started getting what almost felt like a panic attack. I was feeling normal one moment, and then the next was feeling like the whole world was crashing down. I've only ever had 1 or 2 actual panic attacks, and the first one ended up with me going to the ER because I was freaking out thinking I was dying. But thankfully, that taught me to realize what they were and how to best handle them. The main thing I've found that helps me is to get somewhere that is significantly cooler than where I am. Almost like I'm overheating and need to cool off. It being the end of December, the coolest place I could think to go was outside. So I grabbed my jacket and decided that I would go out for a nice, almost midnight stroll to clear my head. I got outside and started walking down toward a small park. I figured I could just walk the path around it a couple of times and it would calm me down. As I was walking down the street, I started getting those interference issues with my hearing aid. And I was actually regretting wearing it out, as it was obviously going to be more of an annoyance than anything. I adjusted it and kept it on, but the further I went, the more and more that hearing aid started picking up something that was loud and staticky. Even though I turned it down to the lowest that I could before just straight turning it off, it was still getting hit with that interference. It was quiet enough that I was able to mostly ignore it and move on. That is, until I actually got out to the park. As I got there, I noticed that even on the lowest setting, there was a shrill, damn near deafening high-pitched screech. It really wasn't helping my anxiety. So I just pulled it off my ear and said screw it before turning it off. As I was aggressively turning the little wheel to shut it off, I noticed that the park wasn't as dark as it should have been. This small park only had one streetlight in the parking lot and nothing on the trails or the playground, mostly because it's supposed to be closed after dark, and it's really not that big. I started thinking that maybe they installed a new light or something when I looked up. And that's where everything got weird. I have no idea what exactly it was that I was looking at. There was an incredibly bright white light just kind of hovering above me. What was really weird about it, it was bright and right there, but at the same time it almost looked like it was also in the sky. I know that makes no sense. But the best way for me to put it was that, while I was staring at it, I lost all sense of depth perception. This light was both right in front of my face and several hundred feet above me at the exact same time. Something about this light was absolutely enough to suck my attention away from everything else. I felt like it was staring at me, as weird as that may sound. It just kind of hovered there, wherever there was. And it almost looked like it was slowly rotating or shifting in a spherical manner. I honestly could not take my eyes off of it. Like, I physically could not look away from this thing. I wish I could explain more about this whole situation, but that was pretty much all there was to it. It was somewhere around 5 to 10 seconds of me just staring blankly at this glowing thing that confused my brain. And then just as quickly as I noticed it, it was completely gone. I stood there dumbfounded and genuinely confused. What's worse, there wasn't anyone else out at the park. It was almost midnight on New Year's Eve, so everyone was home or partying for the countdown. So I was the only person that witnessed this thing. To this day, I have no earthly idea what exactly it was, and I have no evidence that it happened, other than a broken hearing aid which had completely stopped working after this event. I'm not a huge believer in the supernatural, but I don't know if this was a paranormal being, an alien craft, or something from the other side that had crossed over and then left. If anyone else has ever experienced anything like this, I would love to know about it. Because this event was genuinely freaky for me, and is something I still cannot explain. This was something that happened on one of my long hauls back around 2014, I believe it was. I remember this trip not only because of this incident, but it seemed like everything that could go wrong on it did go wrong. So I remember it quite well. I was hauling a load of industrial parts from Atlanta to Albuquerque in October. I remembered the Halloween stuff in the stores that I went to, and I even had a pumpkin hanging up in my car that one of my girls had made for me. I had been on the road for about 6 hours, and was already behind due to a tire exploding, which set me back. I was trying to drive as much as possible to catch up, but sometimes you just have to stop. Nature was calling, and I didn't have a choice. Unfortunately, I was on one of those patches where if you didn't stop at the only one there, you wouldn't be stopping again for another long stretch, so I bit the bullet. I may be a trucker, but I like to think that I have some class in me. I don't like stopping at those run-down, shady places for sanitary and safety purposes. You might get sick, robbed, lose an organ, depending on how gullible you are. Anyways, I stopped since they had truck parking and expected to make it quick. After taking care of business and scrubbing my hands probably 3 times, I grabbed a bag of jerky and an extra bottle of water. As I got in line behind this woman at the counter, I could hear her getting flustered. She was maybe in her late 30s, a bit worn out looking. Her hair was pulled back in what looked like a 3-day-old bun. She was digging around in a large canvas bag, pulling out crumpled papers, a lighter, and some loose change. She sighed and was visibly getting frustrated. So was the older lady behind the counter as she tapped her hand impatiently. The woman said, "I have it, just give me a second," with a bit of exasperation in her cracking voice. The cashier, however, was not very patient. She made a harsh comment to the woman about her holding up the line. It was just the 2 of us, and it looked like we were the only 2 people in the store. And then she added, "And we don't do handouts here." The woman looked up at her, and I could see her face turning red and her eyes starting to water. All she had on the counter was a pack of Marlboros and a Coke. Maybe $8 total. I won't stand here and lie to you and say that it didn't tug at my heartstrings. I had 3 daughters at home, and the thought of any of them being in a situation like that, broke and humiliated in some sketchy truck stop in the middle of nowhere, it made my chest tight. I stepped a little closer, put my 2 things on the counter, and told the cashier that I would pay for her stuff. She rang it up quietly, and as I handed her some bills, the woman thanked me. She said that she had the money and offered to pay me back, but I declined. I told her it was all right and to just pay it forward wherever she could. She made a comment about there still being some good people in the world as she grabbed her stuff and walked out the door. I walked out of the store with my stuff, got back in my truck, and started opening my jerky, not thinking anything of the encounter afterwards. Just another one of those moments on the road, you know? But then, maybe 5 minutes after I'd climbed into my cab, I heard a knock on the door. I looked down and saw the same woman standing there. Now, I'll be honest, my first thought was not charitable. There are a lot of stereotypes about women who hang out at truck stops, terms that I refuse to use. Like I said, I come from a long family of women. I have 3 daughters, 6 sisters, and a lot more cousins and aunts. The ladies are definitely dominant in my family line, so I have nothing but respect for them. And I was raised on how to behave and treat women too. So, while I am a happily married man, I also treat the women out there with the same amount of respect. I don't treat them poorly because of their choice of work. With that being said, I rolled my window down to find out what she needed. She asked me if I was headed west, and I told her I was actually heading east. Her face fell a little, and she said that she was trying to go the opposite direction and was going to ask for a ride. I apologized that I couldn't help. She shook her head and said that it was fine, but then she shared with me something that I would always be thankful for. She told me to be careful if I went through a specific city, and I asked her why. She said that she had gone through the city with someone else, and that it was nothing but trouble. She said the whole time the place gave her the creeps no matter where they were, and it was daylight, versus now where it was starting to get dark out. I remember her actually telling me like she really cared. Just be careful if you drive through it. Don't trust anyone, okay? It was odd. Very, very specific. And she seemed really serious about it, so I nodded and thanked her for the heads up. She gave me a smile and walked back toward the front of the store. I pulled out of the stop thinking about what she said, but not really taking it too seriously. I hadn't driven this way before, so I wasn't familiar with the city or if I would even be driving through it. I was probably an hour into my drive when I saw the sign for that same city coming up in 2 miles. I wasn't planning on stopping, but then I saw the wait station light up. All trucks must enter when open. And the light was green, indicating it was active. When those lights are on, you don't have a choice. You have to pull in or risk getting a hefty fine and possible shutdown of your CDL. I sighed, flipped on my turn signal, and pulled into the way station to approach. And that's when things got weird. The sign clearly said open, but the scale house looked dark. No lights in the windows and no one visible inside. Normally there's at least an attendant visible, or if it's an automated system, there are clear instructions on the electronic board. I rolled onto the scale anyway and just waited. Nothing. No green light to proceed, not even a red light to pull around to the office, just nothing. I was about to radio in to report a malfunctioning station when I finally saw some movement in my side mirror. It appeared to be a police car pulling from around the small building. Its lights were still off. It pulled up alongside my cab, and an officer got out. Immediately, I knew something was not right here. Normally, you might see a DOT inspector in a high-visibility vest. Maybe a commercial vehicle enforcement officer, but a regular police cruiser was not something you normally find at a way station just sitting there. It got even worse as he walked toward me. The uniform looked off, like it was the wrong shade of blue. It almost looked teal. And when he got closer, I realized that he wasn't wearing a badge. No name tag either, just a blank uniform, shirt, and dark pants. He came up to my window and motioned for me to roll it down, and then kept his damn flashlight pointed in my face so I couldn't see his. Everything in me was telling me not to. I was reminded of the woman's warning earlier that evening and everything feeling so wrong here. So, I refused. I cracked my window just an inch and told him I was calling it in. He told me in a very angry tone that I needed to get out of the vehicle. I told him that I've never had to do that in the past, and that I had been a trucker for years. I watched him lower the flashlight, but then he started reaching for something else. Before I even had time to react, he was swinging whatever he had at my window, hard. It was long and thin, like a pipe, maybe? Clearly this was not a real police officer, and I know that came with some hefty charges, if I got the chance to call it in. I had to think fast. I hadn't yet turned my truck off, so I put it back into drive right as he caused my window to spiderweb. I thought for sure he was going to break it. He gave it one last swing, hitting part of my window and part of my door as I rolled away. The problem was that I was about to cause even more damage. There were several orange barrels across the exit, like a makeshift barricade. Certainly not official way station equipment, just regular construction barrels, and definitely a giveaway for me earlier that something wasn't right. I was worried about them being filled with cement, and me damaging my rig even more, but thankfully I plowed right through those suckers. They had obviously just been placed there to try and stop people, but I wasn't taking the chance. The damage they could do to my rig would be minuscule compared to what that guy could do to me. Once back on the highway, I monitored to make sure that I wasn't followed, and I didn't see anything erratic behind me, so I felt safe, and he was smart enough not to follow. I radioed it in to let them know that there may have been some trap set up at the way station, and where it was. They said they would follow the information, and thankfully I never saw that man again. When I was back home, I spoke with a woman who took my call that night. I was good friends with her old man. She told me that she had found out that that particular way station had been closed for the week for maintenance. Somehow, someone was able to turn the open sign on and was luring truckers there. I just hope that they weren't successful with their scheme. I don't believe they ever caught the guy or found out who it was, unfortunately. All I know is that woman from the truck stop that I was at could very well have saved my life with her statement. It definitely looked suspicious when I pulled in, but having her comment in the back of my mind about that city being really creepy, I think it helped me. And all I did for her was show a little bit of compassion. So, I guess, keep that in mind when you're out and about. Karma really does come back around. This story happened a decade ago, but honestly it feels like it was forever ago. I remember pretty much the entire thing, but some of the details are hazy, as this was 11 years ago. And it was quite traumatizing, so my apologies if I miss anything. Let me give you a bit of backstory before we get into the actual situation. That way we can understand how this all happened. So, to start, growing up, we never had a whole lot of money. I wouldn't say that we were poor, and I never went without things that I needed, but we never really had a ton of money or anything like that. We never had a nice car, I never got fancy clothes, and we never went on vacation or anything. It's not to say my parents didn't try. They absolutely did. It's just a good way to look at how it was for me growing up. In addition to this, I never really had many friends when I was young. The neighborhood we lived in didn't have any other children until I was about 10 years old, and my cousin on my mom's side moved in at the corner. When she moved in, we were inseparable. I was always at my aunt's house, and she was always at our house. So, like I mentioned before, our family never really left town or went anywhere fancy or anything like that. So, in 2010, when my grandmother on my mom's side decided to put together a family reunion, and she told my mom that she would pay for the hotel for my parents to come out, and that she wanted them to bring me and my cousin, because my aunt wasn't going to be able to make it, I was ecstatic. I was about to go to Colorado Springs with my best friend, and it was going to be the best summer ever. Even if it was just a medium-priced hotel with almost no amenities for like 3 days. Like I said, I didn't know about the Lux life, so this was an extravagance to me. So we got to the hotel, and I was in love with it. My cousin and I had an adjoining room with my parents, so we were pretty much allowed all the privacy we wanted. But the one thing I really wanted to do was go swimming in that hotel pool. The first night there, I begged my mom to let us go, and she was a bit hesitant at first, but after a while she told us that we could go swimming after a little bit and that either she or my dad would accompany us. That was fine by me. I just wanted to get in the pool. So, we went back to the room and put something on TV and we waited. After about an hour or so, my dad came over to the room and he said that we were allowed to go swimming and that the plans had changed a little bit. He told us that he would walk us down to the pool and stay there for a few minutes. Then, if it seemed safe enough, he would be heading back to their room, so he and my mom could spend some time together. Again, I was totally fine with this. This meant that we got that privacy and got to enjoy the pool. His only stipulation was that we had to be back in the room within 2 hours. Or, if anyone from the hotel told us to leave, we had to do so without question. We both absolutely agreed to their stipulations, and got our swimsuits on, and then the three of us headed down to the pool. When we got there, it was completely empty. There were absolutely no other guests there whatsoever. We got in and were just doing what we did, and after about 5 minutes, my dad said that he was going to go ahead and head back up. He looked up and then back down and told us that as soon as the clock hit 8 p.m., we were to get out of the pool and go straight back up to the rooms. He then laid down all the basic dad rules. Don't talk to anyone that you don't know, follow the rules of the pool, don't leave the pool room, and again, if anyone tells us to leave or asks us where our parents are, we were to get out and tell them that we were just about to leave and do so without question. After he left, the two of us went back to swimming and were having one hell of a time. It went like this for about an hour. No one else walked into the room the whole time, and it was such a blast. And then at about 10 past 7, a guy walked in that looked a bit disheveled. By that, I mean that his hair was dirty, his face was a bit scarred and sunken, and I'm normally not one to judge, but he definitely looked like he was a bit of a creep. Or maybe just angry. Aside from that, though, he was wearing a green polo shirt, which was the same kind of shirt that the front desk attendant was wearing. It was a bit loose on him, not tucked in and a bit dirty, but he appeared to be an employee all the same. My first thought was, oh great, he's going to kick us out. He walked over to the side of the pool and waved us over to him. Obviously, I didn't really want to talk to this guy, but my dad told us to be respectful if an employee came in, so we swam over to him. As soon as we got close to him, he smiled and asked us if we were enjoying ourselves. We said we were. I told him that this was the first time I'd gone swimming in a few years, just trying to be polite and make some small talk, in hopes that he would turn a blind eye to us swimming without our parents. He then asked us if it was just us in the pool. We nodded and told him that it had been empty the entire time. He smiled and nodded along with us for a moment, and then started asking us where we were from. Like an idiot, I told him that we were from Missouri and that we were here for a family get-together. I don't know why I told him this, and I know it was stupid, but I think I was just hoping he would go away if I satisfied his queries. He then tells us that he's new to the area and that he hadn't met many people. I thought this was weird since he literally worked at a hub where people were in and out all the time, but I also figured he probably meant locals. Then, out of nowhere, he literally says to us, "All right, now how about you girls take off your tops?" Obviously, we thought this was a joke, and an incredibly awkward and inappropriate one at that. I started to laugh. My cousin nervously chuckled along with me, and I told him that we weren't going to do that. He then lifted his loose-fitting green shirt and tucked into his belt was some kind of handgun. Then he smiles and tells us that he wasn't joking, and that he wanted us to slowly take off our tops before he did something we would regret. My smile fell fast. Like, I went from awkward laughter to nearly sobbing within a second. My poor cousin, who had pretty much just been quiet this whole time, basically started pleading with him to just leave us alone and we wouldn't tell anyone about this whole thing. Which was a whole hell of a lot smarter than what I had been saying. He laughed again and then said, "Look, you're not going to tell anyone anyways, because if you do, I'll find you. Now I want you to both start undressing, and this will all be over in just a few minutes." I looked at her, she looked at me, and neither of us knew what to do at that moment. In my infinite wisdom, I thought that maybe if I stood up and just did what he wanted, he would just go, and this could all be over with. So I stood up and started to reach back to untie my top. The look on his face was disgusting. He was clearly happy with the situation. I was almost done untying my cover when his disgustingly pleased look changed to, well, I think it was concern. He told me to stop, so I did. Then he asked me, "Wait, how old are you girls?" I told him that we were both 15. As soon as I said we were 15, he dropped his shirt and genuinely looked pissed off. After a moment of angry staring, he seriously looked at me and said, "Never mind, I didn't know you were just a kid," and then started to walk back towards the exit. He grabbed the handle of the door, looked back, and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I thought you were of age. I was never here," and then left. The whole thing came to a screeching halt, much to my personal preference. Within a second, as soon as he realized we were kids, he decided that what he was doing was indecent. And yes, before anyone asks, we ran to the front desk and told them about the employee that had just tried to make us strip in the pool at gunpoint. We described him. We told them everything. And they then told us that there was no employee that looked like that at the hotel. I think it was then that it occurred to me that, yeah, he was wearing a green polo. But I never saw a hotel logo, and he never said that he worked there. I just assumed. They called our parents and had them come down, and then they called the police. The cops came and took our statements, and then they looked at the cameras and had us verify the person in the footage. My mom didn't let us out of her sight for pretty much the rest of the vacation. We didn't get to go swimming again, not like I wanted to, and honestly, this tainted my thoughts on the whole trip. I don't know if they ever caught the guy. We were only there for 2 days after all this, and they never informed us of it. So, to wrap all this up, dear creep of the hotel pool in Colorado Springs, I do want to say thank you for realizing that it was creepy to ask a 15-year-old girl to strip for you, but at the same time, screw you for being such a sleaze and trying to get girls to strip for you by brandishing a gun. I genuinely hope that you're in prison rotting somewhere, and I hope that I never meet you again. Hello. My name is Ashley, and I'm submitting a personal experience from December of 2012 in New Plymouth, New Zealand. I have never shared this publicly before. Sorry if the flow isn't perfect, as writing this was difficult, and you're very welcome to edit it if it helps the story work better for the show. I don't use or have ever had social media, but I do love listening to your podcast, and this is the only place that I will post this story, so thank you for giving me this opportunity to get this off of my chest somewhere, and thank you for taking the time to read it. I want to start by saying that I'm a skeptic by nature. I don't actively believe in UFOs or paranormal explanations, and I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened. That's part of why this experience shook me so deeply. Even now, I still can't explain it. I'm not here to claim aliens or anything supernatural. I only know what I saw, and whatever it was real. This happened in December of 2012 in New Plymouth, New Zealand. I was 18 and finishing my final year of high school. In New Zealand, once exams begin, you don't attend normal classes anymore. You only come in for exams. That evening, I had just finished one. It was summer, and although it was around 7:30 to 8 p.m., it was still very bright outside. That long daylight you get at the end of the year. Before I get to the encounter itself, some context about my friend Sophie and me. We met in 2009 while attending New Plymouth Girls High School and became best friends, despite being complete opposites, which is part of why this experience has stayed with me for so long. Sophie was tall, around 6 foot, with dark hair, an alternative style, and tattoos. In New Zealand, you can start getting tattoos at 16 with guardian permission, and she fully leaned into that look. I was the opposite. I was about 5'4", blonde at the time, and fairly innocent. I loved Hannah Montana and listened to Miley Cyrus constantly. We didn't look like the kind of people who would even be friends, but we balanced each other out and were best friends throughout high school. That matters because Sophie wasn't someone who scared easily, or jumped to conclusions. Neither of us was prone to imagining things. Instead of catching the bus back to my hometown in Waitara, I planned to stay at Sophie's place. She didn't have an exam that day, so she met me afterward, and we spent a few hours wandering around the New Plymouth CBD, talking and just killing time. Later, we started walking back to her aunt's house. The route took us along Coronation Avenue, a long, usually busy road near New Plymouth Boys High School and the racecourse. There are hotels, shops, and traffic at most hours. We walked on the racecourse side of the road, where there was grass instead of a footpath, but plenty of room to walk. We had been walking for a while when something caught my eye to the right, hovering above the racecourse, maybe about 15 meters in the air. At first I thought it was a kite, and then I realized that it was keeping pace with us. It wasn't drifting in the wind or lagging behind, it stayed perfectly aligned with us as we walked. The strangest part was that it looked like it was following us without actually moving. There was no visible forward motion, no drifting or acceleration. Yet it remained exactly level with us the entire time, as if our movement alone was enough to keep it beside us. That was the moment that I knew something wasn't right. We both got a clear look at it, and I still can't explain what it was. It appeared to change size and shape within seconds, almost like it couldn't hold a stable form. The surface looked gray and static-like, glitchy, like a television on a dead channel. Around it were strange distortions, blob-like pockets in the air that looked warped, as if reality around it wasn't behaving properly. At the time, drones weren't really a thing in New Zealand, especially not in 2012, so it didn't feel like a remote-controlled device. Eventually, one of us whispered, "What is that?" We tried to name it. A kite, a bird, but none of it fit. It wasn't anything we recognized. The worst part was the feeling that it gave us. It felt aware. Every instinct in my body told me not to talk too much, like saying the wrong thing would make it notice us even more. Even afterward, I had this deep, unsettling feeling that something inside me was warning me not to talk about it, or else it would come back. Then the street changed. Coronation Avenue is usually noisy, especially in summer, but suddenly there was nothing. No cars, no voices, no footsteps, not even distant traffic. It was like someone had turned the sound off completely. We panicked and ran. At first, there was no houses on our side of the road, just open space by the racecourse. The feeling of being followed intensified like pressure on the back of my neck. Eventually, houses appeared again, and we slowed just long enough to consider knocking on a random door for help, but then the object disappeared. It was just gone. Shaken, we tried to rationalize what had happened, and kept walking towards Sophie's aunt's house, telling ourselves it was over, but it wasn't. A few minutes later, it appeared again, this time closer and moving faster. We were on a completely different street now. We started running again, crying, completely terrified. Once again, we were about to knock on someone's door for help, and that's when Sophie's mom suddenly drove past. This alone was strange, because Sophie hadn't spoken to her mom in some time. She stopped and asked if we wanted to ride. We didn't explain anything. We didn't say a word, we just got into the back seat as fast as we could. We sat in complete silence until we were dropped off at Sophie's aunt's house. Later that night, Sophie told me that this wasn't the first time she had seen something like this. She said that before what happened to us, she had once looked out of her bedroom window and seen a UFO hovering over a forest about 1 kilometer away on someone's farm. It wasn't moving, just hovering in the distance. I believed her immediately. Sophie wasn't someone who lied or exaggerated, and I knew she wouldn't make something up like that. She told me that seeing something like this for a second time within a short period really frightened her. After what happened that night, she was genuinely shaken in a way that I had never seen before. Her aunt's house was right on the edge of town. In New Plymouth, you can be in the city and just 5 minutes later be surrounded by countryside, which made how isolated and quiet that street felt that evening even more unsettling. Even now, there are nights when this memory comes back too clearly, and I have to force myself to think about something else. It feels like a warning from a second voice in my head, telling me to stop before I think too hard about it, as if dwelling on it for too long might make that thing reappear. I don't use social media, and this is the first time I've ever shared this online. I've only told my closest friends and family, and part of me hopes that Sophie might somehow hear this someday. I miss her deeply, and I hope she hasn't seen anything like that again. I still don't know what followed us, and I still don't know how it moved without moving. And I still don't know why it felt so aware of us. But whatever it was, it didn't feel random, and that's the part that I've never been able to shake. I had been hauling freight for a good 14 years at this point, and I have seen and heard a lot. Anything from truck stop thieves, people trying to hitch rides under and on top of trailers. I've even picked up a few myself to be friendly and have someone to talk to at times. I always have protection, and being a pretty big guy, I was never worried about something happening. Then, I've seen some pretty crazy accidents involving people that I knew. Hell, one of my friends lost his life because of it. But there was one thing that happened to me that, to this day, I still cannot wrap my head around. I've been driving for about 11 hours straight, hauling some pretty expensive electronics from Memphis to Kansas City. It was around 1 a.m. when I finally decided to pull off onto a rest stop off of I-70. It wasn't a bad-looking place. It was an older one that just had the small building stalls on each side, with some vending machines in the front. There was one other truck there and a few cars on the other side when I pulled in. Nothing really of interest going on otherwise. I did my usual routine. After using the restroom, I called my wife and told her that I was stopping for the night. We talked for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then told each other goodnight. I took my shoes off, locked my door, and set an alarm before crashing in the sleeper. It usually doesn't take me long to fall asleep, and once I'm out, I'm actually a pretty heavy sleeper. But that night, something woke me up around 2 in the morning. The truck was rocking. Not violently, but enough that I could feel it. It was like someone was climbing on the side of the rig or walking on the catwalk. My heart started racing as I sat up and checked my mirrors. I was worried that someone may have been trying to break into my truck. It's unfortunately something I've seen happen before, and depending on what you have in the truck and what they're armed with, you're better off keeping your head down and calling for help. The parking lot lights had a bit of an orange glow to it, making the place look kind of eerie. But otherwise, I didn't see a single soul. I couldn't quite make out the car side of the rest stop, but there was still a truck a few spaces up from me. But I still did not see a single person around. I waited and listened for some scraping sounds or muffled talking, but none of that happened. I just saw a tree in the distance swaying, so I remember thinking, it's just the wind, dumbass. And then I calmed down. Big trucks can often have a bit of a sway to them if the wind is strong enough and it hits just right. So, after about 10 minutes, and finally calming down while still not seeing or hearing anything, I lied back down and eventually fell back to sleep. I woke up in the morning to my alarm around 7 a.m. I felt a little groggy, but otherwise I was okay. I sat up for a moment to get my bearings, and then grabbed my bag and headed to the restroom to splash some water on my face and brush my teeth. As I walked toward the building, I noticed that there was not a single soul around me. The other truck was gone and there were no cars on the other side. I heard no water running in the building either. I was alone. After I finished doing what I needed, I grabbed myself one of those god-awful sugar-free energy drinks from the vending machine. It was one of those off-brand ones that had probably been in there for years. It tasted like battery acid, but they do the job in a pinch. I stood next to my rig, stretching out my back. You know how it is, after sleeping in a cramped place. Everything's stiff and creaky and pops a lot. I went to pull my phone out of my pocket to text my wife good morning. She would have been at work already at that point, and that's when I started hearing this sound. It was a shuffling sound, kind of like fabric rubbing against metal. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rest stops always have that ambient noise, trucks idling, people walking around, birds, cars passing. But then I noticed that the sound was actually coming from somewhere very close. Like, right next to me, close. I froze in place, moving just my eyes, trying to hone in on where the sound was coming from. Then, adding to the shuffling, there was a grunt, and it was clear that it was coming from my truck, specifically from the underbunk storage compartment. I slowly set down my drink on the step and moved toward the compartment door. I stood next to it trying to determine if I should open it, when it started to open from the inside without my help. I stepped back, my mind racing. Did I leave it open? Was there an animal in there? But then a hand came out, gripping the edge of the compartment door, followed by a person. A whole-ass person crawled out of my storage compartment. It was a guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a dirty jacket and jeans. He had a short but wild beard and a knit cap pulled over his ears. He crawled out, got to his feet, and stretched his arms above his head like he was waking up from a peaceful night at a hotel. Once standing back up with his arms to his side, he looked at me, gave me a single nod, just a casual, hey, morning kind of nod, and started walking toward the restroom building. I was left stunned, watching him walk away like he hadn't just spent the night sleeping in my truck's storage compartment, like some kind of human raccoon. When I finally broke out of my stupor, I yelled out, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" But he didn't even skip a beat. He didn't stop. He didn't even look back. He just kept walking, hands in his pockets, not hurrying, nothing. I went to check the compartment and make sure that all of my stuff was still in there. My tools were still there, socket sets, spare straps, emergency road and medical kits, all of it. I did a quick inventory, remembering what all was in there, but nothing was missing. And thankfully, nothing was left behind either. No trash or belongings. Some of the softer packs were pushed toward the back, almost like it was piled on to be used as a pillow, but that was it. I shut the compartment door and made sure that it latched properly this time. Then I locked it. And that's when I realized that I must have forgotten to lock it the night before. Or maybe the lock didn't quite catch right. Either way, I had essentially left the door open for anyone to just move in, I guess. As I stood there checking my stuff and closing the door, the reality of the situation really hit me. This could have been really dangerous for both of us. The stranger had been sleeping less than 2 feet away from me, separated by only a thin panel. He could have had a weapon. He could have broken into the cab while I was sleeping. He could have just stolen my equipment or even my truck, but he didn't. He just slept there, using it as a free motel room, and then casually went about his morning. I climbed back into my cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute trying to process what had just happened. What adds to the whole thing for me was that I looked around the parking lot for any signs of a car that he might have come from, but there was nothing. No vehicles, no trucks, hell, not even a motorcycle or bike. So where did this guy come from? There was no way that he walked to that rest stop. Was he hitchhiking and just left there? I had no idea. The answers weren't too important to me at the time. I decided that I didn't want to stick around to find out if he had further plans. I started my truck up and pulled out of the rest stop, checking my mirrors to see if the guy would come running back. Maybe yelling that I was leaving with his stuff or something, but I never saw him. It wasn't until I merged back onto I-70 that the absurdity of the whole situation hit me. That's when I started laughing, like full-on cracking up to the point that I had to wipe the tears from my eyes. I'm sure if someone saw me, they would think I was crazy. Some random dude had just used my truck's compartment as a crash pad. Woke up, stretched like he had paid for the accommodations, and nodded at me like we were neighbors passing on the street. There was no apology, no explanation, no thanks for the place to sleep, and he certainly didn't look ashamed or scared. The sheer audacity of it was almost admirable, and I couldn't be mad anymore. I called my wife later that morning and told her the story. She didn't find it quite as funny as I did at the time, going on about how dangerous it could have been, how I needed to be more careful, and how I should have called the police. She was right about the dangers, but the fact that he didn't try to hurt me, nor did he steal anything, I didn't feel the need to call the cops. But in the moment, all I could think was, that guy seriously had some serious nerves. But after it was all over, my thoughts only remained on the curious side of the situation. And I wish I could have asked him how the hell he got there in the first place. This happened a few years ago when a friend and I shared a duplex. These were owned by individual people instead of a company, so there were fewer people around, less staff to monitor us, and we were pretty much left to ourselves. There were a few other surrounding duplexes to our sides, and really nice looking houses across from us. Some of the duplexes looked okay, like ours. Some of the others weren't as nice and taken care of, and the same went with some of the tenants. Some of them were good people. Some kept to themselves, and some you tended to avoid eye contact with. Thankfully, our neighbor of the attached duplex was one of the good ones. Well, at least half of them. It was an older woman, Ruby, that lived there. When we moved in, she seemed very spry and outdoorsy too. It's part of the reason why Jess got so involved in gardening. She was always outside planting, watering, and de-weeding, cleaning her patio furniture, etc. She would make too many sweets or snacks, and always bring us the extras, just things like that. We didn't mind at all, and otherwise, she kept to herself, and we kept to ours. There was no snooping around, asking questions, and getting in each other's business either, so she was pretty much the perfect neighbor. However, Ruby had a son, Marco, that was less than welcoming, and we didn't care to see him around. He would randomly show up, and when she wasn't home, he could just be standing outside for hours until she got back. The first time we saw him, he was sitting on her steps in a hoodie and jeans falling asleep. We did have a security camera set up, so after about an hour of him sitting there, I almost went to ask him who he was waiting for when I noticed Ruby pull in. I watched through the window just to make sure because I didn't want her to be harassed or something worse if this was a stranger. I saw the smile on her face fade to more of a fake grin when she saw him sitting there and they started talking. She then let him in, and from there I assumed that she knew who the person was and let it go. Marco would randomly show up at times and could be there for a few hours, and then someone would just come pick him up. Or it would appear like he would stay there overnight a few times. We were finally introduced one time when we were out front smoking and he asked for a cigarette. Ruby came over shortly after and told us that was her son and he was visiting for a little while. We were polite, but the guy definitely didn't seem like he was all there. He typically looked exhausted all the time. It started to become a normal thing when he was around. As soon as we were outside, he was asking us for a smoke, and he was over there maybe once a week. Then for a while it became less frequent, maybe a couple days a month. Then after not seeing him for 2 or 3 months, he showed back up again sitting on the porch with a backpack and a box. It would turn out that he would move in with Ruby. Great. She didn't look too thrilled about it either. As I started to hear them talk outside on the back patio, she was asking him about his plans and he would get irritated and say things like he didn't know. He didn't have any, don't worry about me, etc. One time, late at night, after he bummed another smoke from us, he asked where he could go to get cheap beer without being carded. We told him that we really didn't know and just told him about the local liquor store. He then proceeded to walk off down the street, and as we finished our cigarette, Ruby came out and apologized for her son. She said that he'd been down on his luck, and she was trying to get him back on his feet, and that she appreciated us being patient with him around. She tried to offer us money for the smokes that he kept taking, but we always refused. Sadly, they would begin arguing more. You could hear them fighting outside. Then you could hear them fighting inside. You could hear the door slamming as he left and him banging on the door to be let back in when he forgot his key. Ruby had already started to shut herself in more. We hardly saw her go outside. I would notice on the camera that she would go out real early in the morning in her robe to water her plants, and then quickly go back inside. I think that she had like a book club or Bible club every Wednesday night, and a few other ladies would be over at her place, and that all stopped too. I felt bad, but there wasn't really anything we could do but just hope that he would leave. That would soon come to fruition when he got kicked out. They were arguing again after someone else, equally shady, showed up at her place. Marco went outside and brazenly, with a camera right on them, made a drug deal. I now understood why Ruby had been so upset. I can't imagine that it was for her or that she used at all. I shamefully went out back to listen to the fight when I heard it, and she mentioned that he was there for a new start, to kick his habits, and get his own place. She complained that he was using again and that he hadn't found a job or even had proof that he was looking. She said that she didn't want that stuff around her, in her home, and she didn't want his friends to know where she lived, so she told him to leave. I know that we, for one, were thankful. He slammed the front door and started walking down the street again. I kept checking the cameras a few times to see if he would ever return, but he didn't. And he wouldn't return the next night either. However, it wouldn't be a simple move out by any means. I am a heavy sleeper, so a few hours into my slumber, I'm awoken to Jess banging on my door. As I went to open it, I noticed the smell of smoke. That was the reason for her waking me up, too. We started looking around, making sure that nothing was on fire and trying to find out where the smoke was coming from, when we started hearing smoke alarms going off from Ruby's side. We quickly grabbed our phones and ran outside. Jess started calling 911, and I just remember frantically beating on her door to try and wake her up, but she never answered. This is where I regretted never swapping phone numbers with her. When the fire truck showed up, we told them that we thought Ruby was still inside, and went to the end of the driveway to wait and see what happened. Unfortunately, Ruby was still inside. But they were able to get her out, barely alive. Not only was she in there, but she didn't answer because she had been beaten on the back of her head, causing her to pass out on the living room floor. Of course, the fire was intentionally set as well, and we had a feeling we knew who by. Thankfully, we didn't have to point the finger, as we learned Ruby identified Marco as the one that did it. Jess ended up helping her out a lot when she was at the hospital, and told her what had happened. She had locked Marco out, and he ended up breaking in through the back door. They had gotten into a fight when he hit her in the back of the head, and the next thing she knew, she was at the hospital. But don't worry. She talked to him when he got arrested, and he admitted that he was high when this took place, but thought only his mom's side would burn down, and was sorry for hurting us. Real charmer, right? She had damage in the living room, and they had to repair the wall separating our units, so we got put into a hotel for a while. Jess still keeps in touch with Ruby and tells me how she's doing, but I don't care for attached units anymore, and I moved into my own place as soon as I could. Hi, Raven. I have a friend who we'll call H. He told me something that happened to him a few years ago when he was a teenager that he couldn't explain. I believe him because this friend is a cut-and-dry person. This is the first time that he's ever mentioned anything remotely strange. He told me that he was taking a shower on a day like any other, and he bent down to scrub his legs. That's when he felt something sticking out of the side of his calf. Upon further inspection, it looked like some kind of thin metal rod stuck there like a splinter. But when he tried to pull it out, it was almost as if his skin had already healed around it and wouldn't budge. Now, my friend is a pretty clean person, so it's not like he hasn't scrubbed his leg in weeks. He would 100% have noticed at least the morning before the shower, let alone much before it would have time to have fully healed. H thought it was strange that even when putting long pants on that morning, he didn't feel anything brushing against the fabric. He said that it didn't hurt, though, but his dad took him to the emergency room to have it removed since he couldn't pull it out himself. He then told me that the nurses were just as baffled. The doctors did a simple procedure and cut it out and had it sent to a lab. A while later, he called the hospital again to ask for the results from the lab work. Of course, H wanted to know exactly what was in his leg and where it could have come from. But they said that the lab results of the material the rod was made of was classified. They couldn't give him any further information. Classified? He never found out exactly what it was that had probed him. This event happened on the 26th of November in 2025 in the afternoon. I remember because the next day was my friend Z's birthday, and on that day I was stressed out because I was running late to my optician's appointment, and I was being stood up by the plumber. It's important to note that my small town of Greece is undergoing a revitalization process, and pavements are being extended and roads getting smaller. So I was near one of the central squares of my town, and they had just finished extending that pavement, but it's not done yet. So it's just cement, not a sign of the tiles that are meant to be there yet. In addition, it was my first time seeing the new pavement and using it. It was already nighttime, meaning that there was no sun. The clock showed 1856, and my optician's appointment was at 7 p.m. And the neighborhood streetlights were not on. Only the light from the surrounding shops and Christmas decorations on the balconies and the windows of the shops provided light, because my town has a system of energy saving that, every day on rotation, neighborhoods go dark to preserve energy. It started in 2020, when the town lowered the brightness of lights in general for light pollution. Hence, the square was darker than usual, and it gave a very eerie and slight cyberpunk vibe, since the strongest hues of lights were blue and cold white ones. That's when the odd event occurred. I'm walking, hurrying myself when time seems to slow down around me and the lights go dimmer too, with the hue of blue becoming deeper blue and the primary light shining. People around me kept moving in a bit of a slowed down pace, but acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I felt like I was literally suspended in time for a few seconds. I felt lighter both emotionally and also physically. In addition, as I looked around me, I got this familiar feeling that I've been there before. It wasn't the feeling of déjà vu or déjà rev. Déjà rev is when you see a dream you had come true before your eyes, and you know it's your dream, but it happens too fast to even do anything. So back to the event. I see a couple walking by me, and they're discussing food options for the next day's meal and if Mother would like it. And I'm assuming it's the mother-in-law. That happens to my left side, just like the guy with the bike having locked it against the stop sign and making a call to someone. On my right side, there's a guy exiting the cafe shop holding a cup of coffee to go, and he sees Bike Guy and they wave and start to catch up. Then a woman with a baby stroller passes by me, and I see the white blanket in the stroller. I turn up to the sky and I notice the building across from me. It has a mirrored exterior, and it's also reflecting the deep blue light. Then I see two kids holding a basketball passing by me, when the one kid with the dark blue hoodie and brown hair met my eyes, and he looked a bit confused at me. And then I heard a voice behind me say, "Excuse me," and I think I should turn, so I make the move, and somehow the lights were back on how it was before, yet no one was behind me. I look at my phone, and the time is 18:57. So I've been standing there for a minute, yet it felt both longer and faster at the same time. I don't know what happened. I wasn't stressed out to the point of a panic attack, and my usual panic attacks or anxiety attacks don't start with dimming lights. I told my friend Ellen a few days later, and as I was recounting to her what happened, I remembered that I had seen a dream like that in 2020, just in the midst of the pandemic. Yet I didn't remember the detail, just how the square was and the dark blue light that gave it this very otherworldliness. but nothing about the details I mentioned. Also, other people didn't say anything about the dimming blue lights, or anything. And that guy from the cafe shop, he came to the opticians at 1930, and in casual conversation, I asked him if he noticed the lights dimming, saying how we as a town must have issues with the current voltage. He said that he hadn't noticed anything. So, any thoughts? Why did I experience that? And what did I experience exactly? And no, it wasn't an issue with my eyesight or glasses. And that's the event. Thank you for taking the time to read it, Raven. And I hope that you are doing well, too. I knew the kind of man that my ex-husband was becoming. Our relationship started off blissful. Sure, we fought like normal couples, but it escalated quickly. He started becoming controlling, jealous, and accused me of having affairs. He even accused me of sleeping with a female coworker because I talked to her and hung out with her too much. We had been close friends for many years before we even started dating. He didn't have a problem with her prior, and she didn't have a problem with him either. But something in him changed, and I never could determine what that was. I know it sounds absurd now, but at the time it was pretty terrifying and exhausting. Every time I sent a text, every minute I was late coming home, every time I laughed at something on my phone, he would twist it into proof of an affair. It didn't matter that there was no affair and there never was any proof of one. It didn't even matter that his accusations made no logical sense. He was convinced. He was relentless, and nothing I said or did could convince him otherwise. I grew up watching my mom cycle through relationships with controlling and abusive men, and I swore I would never let that be my story. So, when my husband's jealousy grew worse, checking my phone while I slept, showing up at my work, rolling through the parking lot demanding to see me, and demanding that I send pictures at that exact moment, no, I said enough was enough. I didn't talk about it, didn't give him a chance to fix it. I left. I packed my things while he was at work, moved into a small rental house across town, and filed for divorce 2 weeks later. And, for a while there, things were quiet. It was like it was going too smoothly, I thought. I didn't hear from him for nearly a month, and I was beginning to think that maybe he would accept it and just move on. Then the divorce papers were filed. The first call came while I was at work, and I missed it. Then another, and then another. By the time my shift ended, I had 14 missed calls and 8 voicemails. The first one was almost calm, saying that he just wanted to talk and wanted to work it out, claiming that I was making a mistake. The second one was angrier and shorter. Each voicemail became more and more unhinged. He was screaming into the phone and calling me every name you could possibly imagine. I thought about calling him back to actually try and talk to him, but then I got the texts that stopped me. There were also dozens of them. Again, some of them were calm, claiming to still love me and apologizing, and then others were vaguely threatening, saying things like, "I would regret doing this," and others were just incoherent rage. I just stopped reading them, but he kept calling and texting for days. So I blocked his number. That bought me about 2 days of peace, but then I started getting calls and texts from new numbers or blocked numbers. But the messages always had the same undertone, the vile insults, the not-so-empty threats. Oh, and not to mention, telling me how much I had ruined his life. So it was pretty obvious that it was still him. So I did the only other thing I could think of to do, and that was to file a police report and try to get a restraining order. I kept the screenshots of all the messages and the list of missed calls, and even started keeping track of the phone numbers. The officer who took my report seemed sympathetic, I guess, but told me that there wasn't much they could do unless he violated the order directly. So the order was granted and served to him about a week later. Of course, I didn't want him to violate the order. I was hopeful that he would just get it, know that I was serious about all of this, and finally just grow up and drop it. But it clearly only enraged him more. I guess he needed a new way to torment me without doing it directly, or at least making it harder to trace it back to him. I started getting messages from random men. They were graphic and disgusting messages asking me about rates, services, and if I was still available. I was confused and annoyed. I would be sitting in the break room at work and would get a random text with a not-so-work-appropriate photo right there in my face. I finally got the details out of one of the people that texted me, and he sent a screenshot and link to a Craigslist post. On it was a risque picture of myself from the chest down, my phone number, and email and descriptions of different services that I supposedly offered. This led me down a rabbit hole where I found a similar Facebook page with similar details that also had a picture of me on it. It was one thing that those pictures were out there and random guys were messaging me. But that Facebook page was requesting to be friends with a lot of people from my actual page, including family, friends, and even coworkers. I was mortified, but I also knew that there was only one person that would have those photos of me because they were taken for my then husband. He had used my private photos to get back at me. The whole thing was over the top, horrifying, and genuinely embarrassing, but not to mention so incredibly dangerous. Anyone could have tracked me down from those details, since he had used my real name and phone number. So cleaning all that up was a mess. I took some time off work, not being able to bring myself to show my face there. Craigslist wouldn't remove the posts because I wasn't the one who posted them. And Facebook was even worse. I had a few good friends and my sister reported the page for the type of content, and all of them were denied, claiming that it didn't break their rules. Then, I had to go through all the hoops and file reports, prove my identity, and explain to them over and over that I was being impersonated. I finally had some success with both, but the damage was already done. I made a post on my Facebook apologizing to people about it, and then I disabled my account. I changed my phone number, and I created a new email, practically never touching the old one again, and only certain and close people got my new contact information. I even added it all to the police report and explained that he was the only one with access to those photos. The detective assigned to my case said that they were building a case against him for harassment and cyberstalking. It was still in progress when the divorce proceedings continued. He never showed up to court, and his lawyer seemed to have every excuse in the book to try to delay it all. I was just going about my life the best way that I could, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. One night I came home from work, heated up some leftovers, and went to bed pretty early. I was exhausted after a long day, and I just wanted to sleep in. But it was so strange to me because I remember feeling so physically drained, but I could not fall asleep no matter how hard I tried. I ended up not being able to fall asleep until almost 11 p.m. But then I woke up at around 2 in the morning to what sounded like glass breaking. I didn't have any pets at the time, so there was no reason for something to have fallen or broken. I was in the in-between state, trying to determine if I was dreaming when I heard the sound, or if it had really happened. But with how tired I was, I lied there staring off into the dark room for a few seconds. Nothing else happened, so I slowly drifted back to sleep. It wasn't long after that I awoke again, but this time, it was to the smoke alarm going off. I sat up in my bed again, trying to confirm if it was real. It started going off again. I immediately threw the covers off and walked to my door, opening it, and I could already feel the difference in temperature. Down the hall, looking towards the living room, I could see my curtain turning black as the flames climbed up them, the window completely broken. The front door was right by the window, and I was too afraid to approach it. I turned around and ran out of the house through the door in the kitchen. I was in an oversized t-shirt and underwear, no shoes, no phone. I ran to my neighbor's house praying that they would actually answer at whatever time it was. I was banging on the door until that poor old man opened it with a startled look on his face. I told him that my house was on fire and that I needed to use his phone. He brought me in and escorted me to the wired phone in his living room, and I called for help, explaining what little I knew to the operator. The fire department got there fast. They had it out within 20 minutes or so, but the damage was already done. The living room was destroyed, but thankfully it didn't make it much further than that. There was smoke damage in the kitchen, but not much else. The fire investigator found accelerant residue and evidence of multiple ignition points. This wasn't an accident. Someone had set my house on fire while I was sleeping inside. There was no hesitation when they asked if I knew who could have done it. It really wasn't hard to tie him to the scene either. He left the lighter in the yard, the same kind that he always used, as he was a smoker. He randomly decided to stay at his brother and his sister-in-law's house for 2 days, who lived about 10 minutes from me, claiming there was something wrong with the AC at his place. And that night he showed up late. I never had a problem with his brother. We kind of just coexisted, but I think he could also tell that there was something wrong with the situation. The detective told me that he reported him coming home late and acting weird, and I will always appreciate him being honest with the police. So my ex-husband was charged with arson, attempted murder, stalking, harassment, and violation of the restraining order. The trial took even longer than the divorce and cost him a hell of a lot of money, too. But I finally got my divorce and changed my name back. I moved to a different city after it was all said and done, and even got a new job. No matter what I did, I felt that my reputation was ruined there, and I had troubles being around some people. I was basically starting over, but I could not be happier and more relieved. This happened several years ago at this point, and he is still incarcerated, which is why I won't use any real names here. And while our marriage wasn't always bad, I think it'll be a very long time before I even consider getting married again. There are few things in our modern world that are taken more for granted than our roadways, our highways, and thoroughfares. So much of our daily lives hinge on people braving these long stretches of road, boredom, and many dangers both seen and unseen. Roads never stop. Not truly, because no one can afford them to. Not the people running the trucking companies, not the distributors transporting their goods, and not the consumer who relies on steady shipments of everything from food to the devices they use in their daily lives. So roads never stop. Until they do. Once in a great while, something so tremendous happens that even the nearly invincible and unstoppable American highway will grind to an absolute halt. One such case came about in early January of 2022, when a massive snowstorm caused Virginia's I-95 to completely shut down, with stranded motorists and truckers unsure just when, or even if, they would be able to finish their journeys and return home. The warnings were issued. The forecast wasn't a closely guarded state secret, but because of the nature of the modern world, that didn't mean people could just stay home and not do their jobs. Not with so many other people counting on them. Early in the day of January 3rd, 2022, a semi-truck was making its way along the cold and snowy highway. Just another day. Just another road. Just another load. And that was until the driver felt traction betray him and his truck put him in the scariest instant most truck drivers can ever imagine being in. His rig jackknifed. It didn't just jackknife, though. It came to a stop, completely blocking the road. No one was going anywhere until the truck was somehow removed. But here's where things go from, oh, well, that's inconvenient, to, oh no, this is really bad. Because the winter storm wasn't emotionally involved in anyone's day, and the snow not only continued to fall, it started to fall even faster than had originally been predicted. And now people on both sides of the jackknifed rig found themselves trapped. People didn't panic right away, though. Things happen, especially in bad weather. Then people began to realize how slowly 10 minutes go by when nothing is moving around you. Car and semi alike idled, creating little pockets of warmth. But as minutes rolled into hours and the snow began to accumulate on hoods and mirrors, people began to worry about fuel levels. Eventually, they realized they had little to no food, no water. People tried stepping out of their vehicles to stretch their legs, only to realize how cold it had actually gotten. Phones still worked, but there was no real information on any kind of aid coming, or when the storm might lessen. There was nothing anyone could do but wait and hope. After a few hours of just waiting, it became clear that some people had much more experience staying still during times that motion was dangerous. And that's when truckers started getting knocks on their cab. The truckers had deeper fuel tanks. The truckers had warmth that hadn't run dry. They had radios, not just cell phones. Warmth and food were quickly becoming things that were to be shared and not just assumed. The cabs of semis became tiny little bastions of warmth, light, and information scattered through the frozen gridlock. As the night wore on and more cars went cold, motorists found themselves orienting around the trucks. Not because anyone had told or instructed them to, but because the trucks had remained something that most cars could not. Warm, with a source of information in the CB radios, which were far more useful than their phones. The diesel engines cycled steadily, generating soothing warmth. With no ceremony or planning, the trucks became steady reference points on a stretch of road that had lost all sense of direction. With official information scarce, communication began to move laterally instead of vertically. The CB radios that the truckers relied on became something of a lifeline as truckers were able to trade fragments of news, rumors, and theories, piecing together a rough sketch of the situation, long before anything useful was coming through on people's phones. Was it clarity? Absolutely not, but it was something. As the night stretched on, the small practical decisions began to fill the lack of direction. People began checking on nearby vehicles. Doors opened to share warmth and information and even reassurance. No one issued instructions. No one took charge. And yet, in that vacuum left by a stalled system, a kind of order began to emerge. Quiet, temporary, and completely improvised. While the stranded people on I-95 were adapting to these conditions, the larger system designed to manage those conditions was struggling to catch up. Road closure came too late to prevent the gridlock from forming, and by the time the scale of the situation was understood, thousands of vehicles had committed to a stretch of highway that had no easy way out. The road had filled faster than it could be cleared. Responsibility was diffused. Jurisdictions overlapped. Decisions hesitated. What had been a manageable slowdown earlier in the day escalated into an overnight crisis simply because nothing moved fast enough. The next morning, when the snow finally began to let up, traffic began to inch forward once more. There was no moment of celebration, no vast cheer from the crowd. All there was a collective feeling of exhaustion. Drivers quietly pulled off, stiff from being stuck in one place for so long, some of them for more than 20 hours. What had turned into an overnight crisis had ended as what it had begun as, an ordinary winter commute. Everyone went home, and the road resumed its role in modern life as if nothing had ever happened. For many of the people, the experience lingered longer than the storm itself had. The vehicles that had run out of gas idling had to be assisted. Abandoned cars dotted the highway. Everyone remembered how quickly an ordinary drive had turned into an entire overnight ordeal. Not through panic or chaos, but through delay. Yes, the road moved once more, but that sense of permanence, that infallibility, that never really returned. In the days that followed, there were a lot of questions as to just how such a widespread gridlock was allowed to form in the first place. Officials did acknowledge that the closure had come far later than it should have, and certainly not in time to have prevented the congestion from forming the crisis in the first place. Reviews focused less on snow removal efforts and more on the timing of decisions, and on when a road should be closed rather than how quickly it can be cleared after the fact. The I-95 snowstorm didn't require an extraordinary failure to unfold. There was no single decision that caused it, and no single person that could be blamed. The system had in fact worked largely as it was designed to, right up until someone forced it to stop. That's really what made the whole thing so unsettling. So very little had to go wrong for everything to just grind to a complete halt, as it had. Our highways in America and everywhere else are built on the simple assumption of motion. Modern life depends heavily upon that assumption. That moment when movement stops, the systems layered under them begin to strain, and bit by bit that burden is shifted onto the people already on the road. The truckers and motorists all find themselves a part of some kind of test that they did not agree to. And ultimately, one that reveals just how thin that line between normalcy and crisis truly is. In the end, the truly unsettling thing about what happened on I-95 wasn't just that it happened, but how easily it could happen again. Anywhere that has weather that can become extreme, which is anywhere. The road moved on, life resumed, as it always does, and once more that illusion of permanence settled over the highway. Unchanged, but never again unchallenged. This isn't as much a small-town horror story as it is a middle-of-nowhere horror story, or a horror story that took place just past a small town. But I think it still qualifies because it occurred on our way out of the small town. A few years ago, around the summer of 2018, my girlfriend and I came into a bit of money, and we decided that we wanted to take a cross-country road trip. Basically, we would drive from Pittsburgh all the way to Las Vegas, spend a few days in Vegas, and then drive back. The trip in both directions was going to take around 32 hours total if we went straight across on I-70, and we would be tasked with driving from Pennsylvania to Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, and then Utah, before finally getting to Nevada. We planned to do this over a few days, and we wanted to stop in a few states to get some pictures, and just kind of enjoy some of the Midwest. I know a lot of people will say that the Midwest is boring, but if you think too hard on it, well, every state is boring. I think they all have their own personal charm. So we plotted our whole route, decided on a few places to stop, and everything was going pretty smoothly. Most of the trip was just straight driving. We were making great time, and this event was really the only thing that stood out. There was one point where we had to stop to get gas, and my girlfriend said that she wanted to also stop to get something to eat. At this point, we were about 2/3 of the way through Kansas, and the next town was a small town called Ellis. Ellis, Kansas is a bit to the west of Hays, which is actually a decent-sized city for being in the literal middle of nowhere. But Ellis is pretty much the polar opposite. A small-town vibe with nothing much to do or see. But it does have its own rustic charms. We pulled into Ellis and got gas when I saw a menu for a restaurant that I decided we needed to try. It was a locally owned pizza and Mexican food combo, and I'm a sucker for small-town pizza. I grabbed the menu and got back out to where my girlfriend was finishing filling the tank, and I told her that we had to go. She agreed, and said it sounded interesting if nothing else. So we both left the station and we found the small building for this anomaly of a restaurant. Cutting the details about the food, it was seriously good. If you're ever in Ellis, check this place out. You'll find it. It's the only pizza and Mexican food place there. The whole visit seemed to be fine for the most part. I was enjoying my lunch and I thought that she was as well, until I looked up and saw that she had a strange look on her face. Kind of like she was a bit worried. I immediately asked her what was wrong, and she mentioned that there was a guy at the table at the other corner that was staring intently at us. At first I didn't think much of it, but then I looked back and, sure enough, he was staring. He didn't even make an attempt to look away when I checked. He nodded at me, basically confirming that he knew that I saw him. I quickly looked back to my girlfriend and tried to play it off. Maybe he knew we were tourists, and he didn't like the idea of outsiders. Maybe he thought she was pretty. Maybe he was just a very strange and angry man by nature. She didn't really buy it, but my attention got pulled away from the situation when the waitress came to the table asking how we were doing. I told her we were doing well, and then I started to tell her that we were actually from out of town and traveling across the country. As I mentioned this, I tried to pull my girlfriend into the conversation in hopes to get her mind off of the creep in the corner. It sort of worked. The waitress seemed excited to talk to us about our trip. We explained that we were from Pennsylvania and that we wanted to drive all the way to Vegas so that we could see the parts of the country that we otherwise never would. The conversation between us was great. She mentioned one or two other places we could check out. She started talking about the one time she had gone to Vegas when she was younger. Really, it was just friendly small talk. When we finished talking and she walked away to go do what she had to do, my girlfriend looked back and told me that the guy was gone. Honestly, that was a relief. I was thinking that we could stop worrying about him and she would calm down and finish her lunch. I really thought that that was going to be the end of the situation. That we would just leave, get back on the highway, and continue driving for a few more hours until we checked into a hotel somewhere. Unfortunately, as fate would have it, that's not how things went. At least, not right away. After lunch, we got back in the car and we hopped back onto I-70 and started out of town. It was less than a couple of miles down the way when we spotted what looked like a minivan stopped in the middle of the road. Long ways. It looked like they were in the middle of a U-turn on the highway and just sort of stopped, or that their car had died. Either way, I slowed down as I approached and stopped the car a bit of a distance from the actual van. A couple car lengths at most. After a few seconds of just sitting there, I noticed that there were two guys sitting in the van. One in the driver's seat, one in the passenger's seat. And they looked like they were discussing something, or rather arguing about it. It was hard to tell. Then, after a few more moments, they look back at us and get out of the car. And that's when my girlfriend said, "That guy that just got out of the passenger side, that's the guy from that pizza place that kept staring at me." I thought surely she was mistaken, and maybe she was just being a bit paranoid because she was freaked out by the whole thing, but then the guy walked around the van. Same flannel, same blue baseball cap, same torn jeans as the weirdo from before. It was at that moment that it clicked what this was, or more likely, what it was. These guys were looking to do something aggressive towards us. Obviously, I didn't know the specifics, if they were going to rob us, steal our car, kidnap us, etc. But it wasn't going to be good. Everything seemed to be incredibly still and silent for a few seconds, until I saw the pizza creep start to reach for something. I have no idea what it was, but as soon as I saw him reach, I told her to get down, and I floored it. I pushed that pedal as hard as I could, and while I may have been driving an early 2000s Honda, that thing jumped into speed quickly. I aimed the car straight for him and toward the shoulder, basically playing chicken with this guy. He was either going to get out of the way and let us pass, or be embarrassingly run over by my tiny-ass sedan. Thankfully, for his sake, he jumped out of the way and I got past them on the shoulder. We kept going at max speed until I thought it was safe to slow down. Honestly, it was weird, and I realize now how dumb it was to do what I did. If he'd had a gun, he would have shot and killed me while I was driving toward him. If he hadn't moved, I would have murdered him with my car, and that would have been a whole other situation. Alternatively, they could have chased us, and let me tell you that Ellis is one of the last small towns that have an actual presence through Colorado. It was a solid 4 hours to Denver, which was the next metropolitan, and I'm assuming that these guys wouldn't have been keen on letting us lead them for 4 hours without just ramming us off the entire road. So, as lovely of a city as Ellis was, and as good as the pizza was, I don't think we're ever going to go back. On the way home, we actually took a different highway just to avoid that part of Kansas altogether. Alright, so this story might be a little different, but to me, it was a very scary and trying time, so I wanted to share it. I mean, we all have different things that are important to us, right? My ex-wife and I were together for a good decade. We had great times, saw new places, and for the most part, it was wonderful. We never had kids, which I'm now grateful for, but we did have a dog, Biscuit, who was, without exaggeration, the best thing to come out of our relationship. We got him as a puppy about 6 months after our wedding. My parents got a puppy as a gift after their wedding as a joke. Basically a, quote, test before you have kids. But they had that dog for the rest of his life. He was like an older brother to me, and I really liked the idea of us doing it. Now, I didn't just show up with a dog. It was a conversation we had, and she agreed with the idea, thinking it would be sweet. So we went and picked him out together. A little golden retriever mix. But I was the one that trained him. I walked him every morning and took him out at night. I took care of all the vet visits and expenses. I was typically the one who paid for the dog food and treats, because he does eat a more expensive brand for medical reasons, but none of that really bothered me. She would play with him, be affectionate for the most part, and so forth, but otherwise, it was becoming pretty clear that he was more my dog and my responsibility than anything. Which, again, was fine by me. I loved that dog, and he was the most lovable thing back. Jennifer just didn't seem to have that connection with pets. Maybe it's because she was an only child, or maybe she wasn't a big animal person. I never really knew, but she just didn't have that same relationship with Biscuit. Then, when our relationship started falling apart, I knew it was going to be messy. Jennifer had always been vindictive when she didn't get her way. It was one of the ugliest things about her. I was the one that asked for the divorce after finding out she'd been lying about our finances. We shared expenses, like I paid the rent on our townhome and she paid the utilities. We both had other random services we paid for, and we each had our own credit card. But it took a while for her to finally admit that she had a lot more credit card debt than she ever told me about, when our water was shut off because she hadn't paid it. We were comfortable with our income and the bills we had. We were both open and honest, or so I thought, about what needed to be paid. But she had opened up several credit cards in both of our names and was maxing them out. Now, I will take part of the blame, because I should have paid more attention to the stuff coming in. But I had always just assumed that she was covering the bills, and what she did with her money afterwards was her thing. But now she had lines in my name that I didn't even know about. There were other things that piled onto it, so I figured it was best if we just split our stuff and go our separate ways. I even agreed to help on 2 credit cards that she put me on instead of claiming fraud. But one thing I was certain of was that I would be taking Biscuit. I asked her about him, and she didn't hesitate in telling me to take him with me. Of course, I am talking about my ex, though, and I should have known that it wouldn't be that easy. Biscuit stayed at the townhome until I found an apartment that allowed dogs, and thankfully it didn't take long. I had texts telling her that I would be coming for Biscuit and his stuff the following weekend, after I had everything moved out. That way I would be able to spend the weekend at home with him. He had only ever known that townhome, so I didn't want to leave him in a strange new place. She agreed to this, saying that was fine. The day that I showed up in my SUV to get Biscuit and the last few of my things, I walked into the townhome to see it practically empty. All the furniture was gone, all of Jennifer's stuff, and Biscuit was gone. There were 2 large tubs left there with my items or stuff that she didn't want, I guess. I called her, but she didn't answer. I texted her, no response. I was probably looking crazy, but I called her a few times and left voicemails demanding an explanation. Finally, 4 hours later, she texted me back saying, "Biscuit is fine. We'll discuss custody." Custody. Of a dog. The next few weeks were hell. I tried everything just to get her to let me see him. I just wanted to see my dog that I had taken care of for the last 8 years. But she always had an excuse. I even offered to pay her for him, to keep him, or to even pay to see him, for crying out loud, but she refused. And she would always line it with talking about the divorce. Unfortunately, there wasn't much else I could do either. Talking to my lawyer, he said that pets are considered property, not dependents, and since we had gotten Biscuit during the marriage, he was joint property, which infuriated me even more. He wasn't property to me. He was a living being. So when I finally got the settlement details, she listed that she wanted sole ownership of Biscuit. I vented to my lawyer that she didn't even care for Biscuit like I did. Why would she want him? And he believed that she was just using him as leverage to get me to give up more for him. And to be honest, it was working. I didn't give a damn what I had left, as long as I had my dog back. All I needed was him and my car. The rest, I would figure out. Then, I got that reminder email from Biscuit's vet. He'd had a thyroid condition since he was 5 that he took medication for daily. I would pay for it and pick it up at the vet every month, and I usually picked it up a few days earlier to make sure that we never ran out. But the email that I got said that it hadn't been filled yet and that it was a week late. He hadn't been on his medication for at least a week at that point. I even called the vet to confirm this, and the tech confirmed that it had not been refilled yet. I was furious. Not only was she keeping him from me, but she was also not taking care of him. I went to my lawyer with this, and he said that we could file an emergency motion for return, since we had proof that she wasn't taking proper care of him. So, we went to court. I had all of my documents and proof of vet bills that I paid, including the missed refill. The judge must have been a fellow pet owner because I could see the slight change in his expression. He mentioned that it was definitely a credible concern and asked Jennifer where he was. I was expecting her to be difficult. I was expecting her to give every excuse and attitude as to why she couldn't or wouldn't hand him over. What I did not expect was for her to share that he was dead. My head was spinning, and I was slowly filling with rage and this overwhelming sadness. The judge asked her what had happened, and she had the gall to say that he had died about 2 weeks prior to this, and that it was due to the stress of the divorce. That it was somehow my fault. The judge looked furious, mentioning how she's wasting time on all of this when she should have reported his passing when it happened. She snapped back, annoyed, saying that she was the victim, that she had been caring for him, and she was grieving for her loss too. The judge asked for proof, and she said that she didn't have any other than his body, buried in her mom's backyard. And that was it. None of this meant anything to me anymore. I didn't care what I ended up with at that point. All I wanted was my dog, and she couldn't even give that to me. I remember going back to my apartment and crying. Crying like a child that had just lost his first pet. I had friends and family stop by for comfort. They brought me food and gifts from my new home, but it still felt so empty without my buddy. But then, about 4 days after that court date, I got a call from an animal shelter. They asked if I was Aiden, and I said that I was. They called to confirm if I had surrendered my dog Biscuit or if he was lost and found. I almost dropped my phone. I thought this was a prank. Someone Jennifer knew that was just trying to screw with me, and I almost went off. I asked her what she meant, and she said that they had what looked like a retriever mix that was brought in about a week prior by an older woman, saying that the dog had just been walking around on the side of the road like someone had left him. They were pretty busy and full up, so they hadn't had a chance to scan him for a chip until that day, and they found my contact information. I had had him chipped as a puppy. I was at the shelter in less than 20 minutes. The second they brought him out, I knew that it was Biscuit. He was thinner than I had ever seen him. He looked exhausted and his coat was dull. But when he saw me, he started yelping and pulling toward me so hard that the shelter worker almost lost her grip on the leash. I was asking them how they found him, and they explained that it was an older lady that had brought him in. He had on a collar, but she took it off of him, claiming it was for her own dog and was just using it to restrain him. But then she said it was odd because the lady didn't seem to care about finding the owner or anything. Just basically pushed Biscuit onto them and quickly left. Based on her description, I guarantee it was Jennifer's mom. And she just took Biscuit's collar, both of them thinking that there would be no way to trace him back to us. I guess Jennifer forgot that I'd had him chipped. They gave me Biscuit back after showing them my ID, and they waived the fee. I called my lawyer on the way home with him. Not only did she refuse to let me see him or have him back, she was not keeping up on his meds. She had lied to the judge about him being dead and then just abandoned him. And now I had proof. We filed another emergency motion, and the hearing was brutal. The judge ordered her to explain herself, and she got defensive, saying that she had made a mistake and panicked. The judge cut her off, and I will never forget what he said. He reminded her how serious it was to lie to a judge in court, and reprimanded her, saying that animals are not bargaining chips, that she had just used him as leverage, and when she didn't get her way, she abandoned him. He also told her that if she actually loved him, she wouldn't have acted this way, and that it was one of the most callous displays he had ever seen. I was given full ownership of Biscuit since she surrendered him to a shelter anyways, and she confirmed my suspicions, trying to claim that her mother surrendered him without her knowledge, trying to pin it all on her. So, I got him back on his medication immediately, and he has gained his weight back. His coat is shiny again, and he's back to fully energized Biscuit. And I still have him to this day. And he's actually sleeping on the couch next to me as I finish this up. So, yeah. I guess I'm the guy that went to court for my dog. I filed police reports and gave up more in the divorce than I probably needed to, but it was worth it. And I would do it all over again for him. When I was in high school, I used to watch my two baby nephews, Ben and Sammy, a few times a week over at my brother Terrence's house during the week. My brother was a pretty chill guy, and I loved spending time with the little nephews, so it wasn't that big of a deal to me to lose a few nights during my week. They were still pretty young, and were still in that age range where they could easily be entertained by SpongeBob and chicken nuggets, while I messed around with my phone or on my DS. It was really just like I had a couple younger brothers that needed my attention every now and then, and I loved it. My brother had always been a good kid, but as he got a bit older, he ended up getting in with the wrong crowd, and fell in love with a woman who was a terrible influence on him, Kaylee. Kaylee was a user, and I mean of both people and substance. Unfortunately, Terrence wanted to see the best in her and decided that she was worth his time. They ended up getting together, but not married, and had 2 kids together, Ben and Sammy. At some point after Sammy's first birthday, Kaylee got picked up for attempting to shoplift from a big box store, and then got her basic misdemeanor charge changed to a pretty hefty felony when the police found a significant amount of amphetamines in her purse. Like, enough for her to be charged with intent to distribute. All of this is important because it's what left my brother in charge of 2 young boys as a single father, and is why I had to watch them several times a week while he worked his second job. Now, this ritual of him working nights, and me watching them for him, had been going on for around 6 months at this point, and without issue. And with Kaylee in prison for years, I thought it would just keep being a smooth situation. Well, I thought wrong. It was a pretty normal Tuesday night at Terrence's house. I was there watching the boys, and they were watching some cartoons while I was making dinner, when I heard a knock on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I thought maybe it was an Amazon package or something, just knocking to let us know that it was delivered. I kept making dinner and ignored it for the moment, and then I heard the doorbell ring. At this point, Ben walks into the room to tell me that Aunt Becca was at the door. Rebecca, or Aunt Becca, was Kaylee's sister, and was just as bad, if not worse, than Kaylee. On top of that, Terrence had a no-contact order against her. She wasn't supposed to be there, and she wasn't supposed to be near the kids. I told Ben to take Sammy to his room and stay there, and that I would be up in just a moment, and then I sent a quick message to Terrence that basically said, "Rebecca is at the door, telling her to leave." I then unlocked the door but kept the chain connected and opened the door slightly, asking if I could help her. She stares at me for a second and then huffs and lets out a snide chuckle. "I'm here to see my nephews. Where's Terrence?" I tell her that Terrence isn't there and that she would need to come back another time to talk about the situation. She tells me that I need to let her in to see her nephews right then and there. At this point, Terrence is calling me, so I put the phone on speaker and tell him that I was just informing Rebecca that she needed to leave. She starts yelling at me and at the phone, saying that she has a right to see her family, and that he can't keep them from her. He calmly but directly says, "Rebecca, you need to leave. If you're not gone within 3 minutes, my brother will be calling the police and telling them that you're currently violating a restraining order. You aren't supposed to be anywhere near my sons, and you aren't supposed to be on my property. So, Phil, if she's not gone in 3 minutes, call the cops. I agreed. He said to call him back and let him know what's going on, and that he would be home soon. Then he hung up. At this point, Rebecca is screaming at me about how I'm ruining her life, calling me every derogatory and racist name that she can pull out of her mouth. I once again very firmly tell her to leave and just go to shut the door. She tries to push her hand in the gap to stop it from closing, but I wasn't having it. I kept pushing the door against her fingers. If she was going to try to force her way in, then I was going to use force to keep her out. After a few seconds of what I'm assuming was tremendous pain, she pulls her fingers back and I slam the door, locking the deadbolt and the doorknob. She starts yelling about how she's going to kill me, and how I'm going to regret everything. I gave her the 3 minutes, and by the end of it, she was in her car and driving off, so I texted Terrence to let him know that she was gone, but that she was being incredibly violent with her words. He tells me that if he sees her or a car that looks like hers drive by again, that I need to call the cops immediately and tell them what happened. I agree, and we move on with the rest of the night. I give the boys their food, they're happy and full, and Ben asks if they can go play in their rooms. I told them that was fine, and honestly, my mind was on the possibility of Rebecca coming back, so it was best that they were in their rooms just in case. After about an hour of me sitting and watching SpongeBob by myself, and listening to the boys play upstairs, I got up to go check on them, and no sooner than I stood up, I hear what sounds like a loud smack on the front door. Then the sound of glass breaking. I duck and freak out, and then I grab my phone and run upstairs to my nephew's room, shut the door, and call 911 immediately. Honestly, a good portion of this is a blur. I don't recall the phone call, really. I think a lot of what I said to them was pure instinct, and a lot of my action was based on pure adrenaline. I thought that this crazy woman was seriously trying to break into the house to get to us, and I honestly thought that there was a high possibility I was going to be killed and my nephews kidnapped. After standing in the room with my back against the door for several moments, and telling the 911 operator about the situation, she said that the police would be there in a few minutes, and to just stay in that bedroom. What I hated the most about this was that my nephews were just looking at me. Sammy, too young to process what was going on beyond me being in the room to play with them, and Ben just old enough to know that I was scared of something, but not know what. I sit on the floor and just wait, telling the boys to go back to playing. They do, and I'm holding back tears just waiting for what felt like an eternity for the police to arrive. In reality, it was 9 minutes, but it felt like several hours. When I heard the police announce themselves, I told the boys to stay in the room and that I would be right back. I went out, and there were 2 officers standing at the door with their guns drawn, and several more cars in front of the house with their spotlights shining around the area. I let the officers in, and they asked me if I was okay or if anyone else was in the house. I tell them that I was watching my nephews and that the person that did this was likely their aunt. I explained the whole night to them, and they asked that I contact Terrence and see if he could come home. Long story shorter, and to skip over the conversation with the police, Rebecca had come back and thrown a brick through the garage window and through the bay window in the living room. Even creepier, she had thrown a dead squirrel at the door, and that's what the initial thump was before the bricks came through the window. This woman had lost her mind and was legitimately trying to show how crazy she was. And while I was scared enough to pretty much piss my pants, I was horrified at the thought that she would have been willing to throw a brick through the living room window where one of her nephews could have seriously been sitting. She could have killed one of them easily if they would have been in that room. Thankfully, it was just me, and they were upstairs playing. The police took my statement, and they put out a call on her. They asked the neighbors if they had seen anything and all that. My brother bought security cameras for the window after that night just in case, but from what I recall, she was picked up by the cops and won't be getting out anytime soon. So, Rebecca, the absolutely insane woman that happens to be my nephew's aunt, I hope that you and I never meet again. Hi, Raven. I'm going to tell you about some of my prophetic dreams. These dreams didn't start until I was in my early 20s. I assume the concussion I received in an auto accident at the age of 23 started it, but of course, I don't know for sure. Before the accident, I would get gut feelings every so often that would become reality, but always while I was awake. For instance, I was driving down a country road and told my boyfriend, "This looks like a good place to round a corner and see a cow standing in the middle of the road." Sure enough, a few corners later there was indeed a cow standing in the middle of the road. That scenario played out a few different times with different animals, along with other intuitive experiences. The dreams started about 6 months after my accident. The moment I woke up from the first dream, I knew that it would come true. I can't explain how I knew, but I knew. It's the same with every prophetic dream I've ever had. As soon as I wake up, I know whether it's just a normal dream or something to be cautious of. Sometimes I know the people in my dreams, but most of the times I don't. If a person I know in real life is in one of these dreams, the dream is connected to them, with the exception of one dream so far. There have been times that the person in the dream is me, but the reality happens to someone else. Other times, I'm just an observer in the dream watching from among the people. I generally don't know if the dream will happen to me, someone I know, or someone I don't know. That, in a nutshell, is why I consider it a curse. 9 out of 10 of these dreams are not good, and there's no way for me to warn the people because I have no idea who or where they are. I also never know how long it will be until the dream manifests. I've had some come true the next day, some have waited weeks, and others have occurred while I was dreaming them. I don't have them as often as I used to, thank God, but they've become more intense and have longer-lasting physical repercussions. I've learned how to mentally accept and deal with these dreams, but the older I get, well, my body doesn't cope with the physical stress these dreams cause as well as it used to. Most of my dreams are not suitable for children, adults, or social media as a whole, so I'll start with a few of the family-friendly ones that I'll have, and you can decide what to do with the others. My high school best friend went into the military right after he graduated. We went months at a time with no communication. After my accident, every time I dreamt of him, he would call the next day. That went on for a couple of decades. Even during the time I had no phone, he would call my workplace from wherever he was stationed at the time. There were a few times that he actually came knocking on my door after I had dreamt of him. There have been several dreams where I'm visiting with friends that I haven't seen in a while, and within a week of the dream, that friend comes to visit me, or we happen to cross each other out in the world. I wish all of these dreams were this pleasant. In another dream, I was getting ready to go to a friend's wedding. It was hilarious because I had an extremely poofy dress on and was trying to stuff all that dress into a Corvette. I'm not a poofy dress kind of girl, and I could only dream, pardon the pun, of having a Corvette. The next day, I told my friend that her boyfriend had a surprise for her. I didn't tell her what the surprise was, just that he had one. It was just before her birthday, so it could have been any type of surprise. He proposed on her birthday, and the next spring I went to their reception wearing a long, straight skirt and a blouse, riding in my date's Ford Probe. A far cry from a vet, but in defense of the Ford, seeing that poofy dress fill the Probe would have been a lot funnier. And I'm all for more comedy these days. Years ago, I dreamt I was holding my mom's arm, escorting her across their carport, with a sense of urgency. She was elderly and weak, and I felt as though I had to protect her from something. When I had the dream, she wasn't elderly and weak in real life, but I woke up knowing it was that kind of dream. About 2 years ago, Mom, Dad, and I had been visiting in their carport. When we all stood up to go inside, she stumbled and fell. I realized it was the dream as I was helping her up. She's mostly recovered from her fall, but I still struggle with the fact that both of my parents are elderly. I might struggle even more with the fact that I'm right behind them. One day I was gathering outfits, makeup, and hair accessories for a photo session I had the following day. I wanted to put diamond braids in my hair and search the whole house for my tiny rubber bands. That night, I dreamt that they were in the very back of my dresser drawer. The next morning, I dumped the drawer out and I found them. I still haven't figured out how they got from my hair care kit in the bathroom to the very back of the sock drawer in my bedroom. A married pair of friends of mine had 2 children. I had a dream about each child before they were born and told their parents what gender they were having. I knew of the second pregnancy before they even told me that they were expecting again. Technically, though, you could say I was wrong about the second child's gender, because I dreamt of a male child. They were born male, but is transgender. This next dream comes with a content warning. In fact, the following dreams all come with slight content warnings. This dream only lasted a few seconds. A dream explosion at my feet jolted me awake for real. It felt and sounded so real that I thought a real explosion had occurred. I could feel the heat on my feet and started trying to put out the fire. When I saw there was no fire, I realized it was one of those dreams. This was among the first 10 or 15 dreams I'd had, and I wasn't as quick to recognize them as I am now. A few days later, the newspaper told the story of a woman who had suffered third-degree burns in most of her body when her campsite exploded. I dreamed the explosion, but I can't and don't want to imagine what agony she was in the last month of her life. In this next dream, I was going to a social event. The parking lot was full, and the cars were parked on the side of the road. I parked my car and was walking to the building, and as I was passing one of the parked cars, I noticed a child trying to get out from under the car. One look at him told me that there was nothing I could do for him except call 911 and comfort him in his last moments. This was my first prophetic dream, and it devastated me for months. I didn't know how to process this dream, much less the fact that I knew the dream would become reality. I was so troubled with it that I confided in my best friend the next day. She did her best to convince me that it was just a nightmare, but I knew it was more than that. That weekend, we were at a local watering hole, and another friend told us that her friends had lost their son to a speeding driver when the child rode his bicycle into the street, from between 2 parked cars. We didn't know the grieving family, but that didn't stop both of us from crying our eyes out for them. After seeing the pain I had shared with my bestie that night, I stopped telling her about the really bad ones. She would help me interpret them if I asked her to, but I don't want her to bear any of the guilt that comes with knowing and not being able to help. I also don't want to expose her to the violence and bloodshed that I've seen. She's grown with children and grandchildren, and I'm sure she's seen some horrific things in life, but some of the stuff I've witnessed would make Freddy Krueger cringe. I'll just keep those to myself. In this next dream, I was sleeping and awakened by my front door being kicked in. I couldn't find my protection in the dark. Those few seconds of this dream repeated themselves 4 times. The dream stopped in the middle of me searching for my weapon and started with the door bursting open again. The 4th time, as I was searching, the light in my bedroom came on, and I saw a relative of mine coming at me. Confused by the rage in his eyes and the claw hammer in his hand, I tried to ask what he was doing. He attacked before I could ask. I woke up for real a minute or so into the beating. On full alert, I grabbed my weapon, blocked my door, and sat on the couch guarding the door the rest of the night. Later that morning, I found out that a classmate's grandmother was fighting for her life in the ICU. As I was dreaming it, two of her great-grandchildren, the classmate's children, tried to end her with a claw hammer. When they thought she was gone, they robbed her house. She eventually made a full recovery, and the pair are still in prison. This was the first time I dreamed something while it was happening. I've come to the conclusion that dreams started over 4 times to get synchronized with the real attack. I also believe the reason I couldn't find my weapon in the dream is because Grandma didn't actually have a weapon. I understand that, in my dream, the dream showed me my relative to signify that Grandma was attacked by someone she knew. What I don't understand after all these years of contemplating it is why did it show me that particular relative? I've tried to convince myself that he was shown because he was about the same age as the actual attackers. Tried being the key word in that sentence. I probably shouldn't be, but I'm extremely cautious of him since the dream. So far, this is the only time I've dreamt of someone I know, but the dream had nothing to do with them. Hence, my extreme caution. I started this journey asking, why show me these atrocities when I'm powerless to help the victims? Then I started asking, why me? And who is showing me these nightmares? I've even wondered if I'm astral projecting in my sleep. There have been quite a few times that I truly felt like I possessed the victim while they were being victimized. I know nothing about astral projection or spiritual possession, so I can't speak to their possibilities. I will say that if anyone knows how to astral project themselves, I'll beg you to tell me how to stop it. Otherwise, I'll continue to assume that I'll never know the answer to any of these questions, and I'll try to stop wondering. I guess you could say that I'm more desensitized than most people. My own personal life experiences, movies, and video games started that transition long before the dreams came about, though. I've kept my sanity by taking a few days to process each bad dream and accept the fact that I'm merely a witness to it. Then, I imagine putting them in a basket of a hot air balloon and releasing the dreams and their victims to the wind. I like to think that by giving them back to creation, I'm releasing the victims' souls to find peace. And at the same time, I'm deleting these experiences from my thoughts. When the occasional good dream comes around, I share it with my bestie and hang on to it just a little longer than the bad ones. I used to love going to our local state and county fairs. They were cheaper than going to some of those big amusement parks, and my parents were usually willing to give me and my little sister Grace some money to go on the rides and game tents by ourselves. We were still within their view at all times, though. Can't be too careful. I loved going on all of the rides, whereas Grace preferred the games so she could win the prizes. I would go on the smaller ones for her, like the one that just goes in a circle with small ups and downs and then goes in reverse. We would also go on the classic carousel and bumper cars. However, that also meant that we took the ones that I enjoyed too, like the Ferris wheel, or the scary one that took you through dark rooms with creepy music. Things crawling down the walls, fake screams, and things like that. She handled them pretty well, but she would never go on the rocket one. That's the one that shot you straight up and then did a dead drop to the bottom. So I had to wait until closer to when we were leaving to go with my dad or just go alone. We would go to the game booths as we made our way around. Again, she liked the ones where you had to try and spray the rubber ducks in the water. The bigger the number on the bottom, the bigger the prize you got. She also liked the balloon pop where you had to throw darts at them. She threw the darts like a baseball. It was always hilarious to watch and surprised me when they never bounced back at us. She tried the ring toss or the bottle one, where you have to knock them over with a ball, but her aim wasn't the best, so I always tried those for her and let her pick out the prizes. There was this other one that we both enjoyed, where you had to break open fake rocks and you got to keep whatever was inside. We liked those because they had anything from candy, small toys, and even tickets to other games and rides in them. This particular time, we were having some great luck. Just about every rock we broke had candy in it. So, we went to the Ferris wheel and ended up eating way too much of our spoils. Grace started feeling the effect of it all, between the candy, the sugar rush, and running around everywhere in the Florida heat. She started to crash and felt ill. And because she was only about 6 or so at the time, that meant that all she knew to do was be really grumpy about it. This would mean that we would end up going home fairly soon, but I hadn't been able to go on the rocket yet, so I was upset that I wouldn't get to. To my surprise, my parents decided that maybe we just needed to eat some real food and drink some more water, and we would play it from there. I was hopeful that she would perk up, or that my parents would at least agree to let me go on a few more rides before leaving. So, we made our way to one of the tents to eat. They had a big sign with a hot dog on it, and some movie-parodied name about frying. I don't remember what it was, but my dad always made some joke about it. Anyway, they sold the stuff that you would normally see at a fair. Hot dogs, hamburgers, corn dogs, nachos, onion rings, things like that. Not the healthiest, but at least it was better than candy. The guy running it looked a little off. But since I was a kid, he just looked like someone who was really tired. He had longer hair pulled back into a ponytail, and then covered with a hairnet. He looked like he was swimming in his clothes, though. As though he was super thin and his clothes looked to be 2 or 3 sizes too big. I remember seeing him try to hold his pants up even though he had a belt on. I remember also thinking that maybe he was sick because he kept rubbing or wiping his nose on his shoulder or arm and sniffling a lot. My parents were talking to Grace and asking her what she wanted. She kept fighting them about not wanting to eat and wanting to go to McDonald's instead. My dad tried to convince her that they had chicken strips, which were similar to chicken nuggets. So she finally agreed to get them. We all decided on what we wanted and we placed our order. The guy was staring at my dad all wide-eyed and was always responding like, "Yeah, man, sure. Yeah, no problem, man." All while nodding constantly. My dad paid in cash, and then we went to sit on the bench nearby. Once we got over there, my mom was talking about just going home since it was already getting late, and I started begging them to let me go on the rocket before we left. They were hesitant at first, but said that they would see how Grace felt after we ate. I knew what that meant, and that meant I wasn't going to be able to go. My mom then asked me to go grab some ketchup from up at the stall, and I walked away dragging my feet, visibly upset. I walked back to the tent and started filling the little condiment cups, and was watching the guy make the food. I remember him catching my eye because he looked off. The way he was working was impressive, at least. I watched as he poured fries across the 2 fryers and simultaneously flipped the burger patties. Being a kid, I thought it was pretty smooth, almost like a juggler. That was right about when he noticed me watching him. So then he took the spatula, tossed it in the air, and then spun around and caught it. That's when he posed facing towards me with his arms out like a ta-da moment. He looked like he was enjoying himself with his oversized clothes. It kind of made me chuckle. He walked over by me and asked for my name, and I told him. He asked if I had been having fun. I said yeah, but then mentioned that we were going to have to leave after eating because my sister was sick. And he said he was sorry to hear that, but said that the fair was going to be open for a while, so maybe we would end up coming back. I was just being dramatic, and I said something about probably not, since we only ever go once a year, which wasn't a lie. We rarely went multiple times in the same year unless we went with other people. We both got quiet, so he walked over to the fryer, pulling the fries out, and neatly poured them into a basket. He sat there and stared at it for a few seconds, and then walked back over and leaned in close. He then said, "Hey, I know what'll cheer you up. Do you want to see a really cool trick?" So I, of course, said sure. I would never in a million years expect what this dude would end up doing. He pulled the baskets back out of the fryer and sat them on the counter next to him. He then pulled on the bottom of the glove he was wearing, looked over at me with these wide eyes, wiggling his finger, and said, "Now, you see my fingers?" Curiously, I said, "Yeah." Then, this crazy ass shoves his hand into the hot grease and immediately starts screaming. Then I started screaming. Now, there are two people screaming, and I immediately covered my eyes and just kept screaming. Very quickly, I hear and feel my family run up to me, and my mom grabs me and has me open my eyes. I think she was checking to see if there was any grease on my face. However, I was still within sight of this crazy guy, and I looked over at him to see him pull his hand out, or at least what was left of it, and then he screamed, "Now you don't!" and is going back and forth between laughing and screaming from the pain, I'm sure. The smell was horrendous. Grace had burned some of her hair before when she got too close to a candle, and that smelled awful, but this was worse by at least tenfold. The smell of the flesh almost made me sick, but seeing what was left of his hand, the skin, that did make me sick. So between this, of course, other people now running over to see what's going on, my mom trying to shield our eyes while my dad's calling for help, my mom ended up walking us away while my dad talked to security, the managers, and the paramedics. What's worse is that they even asked me what had happened, in case I was injured, so I had to go through it all again. We definitely left at that point, and I had no arguments with it. But I did have trouble sleeping for a few nights. I don't know what happened to that guy. Never heard anything about him after that, but being older and seeing other people with similar behavior, it was obvious the guy was on something. I can only hope that it at least dulled some of the pain, because I can't imagine what that must have felt like. But since then, I have not gone to another fair. I just can't. And seeing a fryer similar to that one always makes my stomach churn. So, creepy guy from the fair, thanks for years of childhood trauma, and let's continue to never meet again. I have listened to you from the beginning. I only discovered you a few years back, but I listened to you all day and night. It took a year to listen to all the stories, and I love that you're still you. Well, thank you. All the times that you're so hard on yourself, you've found yourself a niche in people's hearts. You don't judge the stories, you don't talk too much about yourself on the podcast, and when you mention certain life events, it makes you real. You're a breath of fresh air with sunshine. Again, thank you. I just want you to know how appreciated you are. I'm in Arizona and I've lived here for 42 years, and I found the true origin story of skinwalkers. Because some people have issues with me saying that, I'm just going to call them walkers for the rest of the story. A long time ago, when Europeans were wreaking havoc, the natives wanted a better way to resist. The shaman conferred with one another. They had connections with Mexican shaman, and a couple of shaman conferred together. One of them was from deep in Mexico. He felt bad for his American neighbors, and he shared a very ancient dark ritual. It was only to be used in the most dire of situations. That is where it came from. I asked why there are so many now, and the answer was this: men want power, and men abuse power. It doesn't make them insane. The walkers here are humans when they want to be. They use terror to sway people to a desired result. You don't talk about them at all, even if you discovered your uncle was a walker and you were a twin. You would not even tell your twin. As a human, they act too big for their britches. Total power corrupts totally. As a walker, they are fast and terrifying. However, they're not all-powerful. They have to take you by surprise. They will not attack head-on. They prey upon the weak, young, and elderly. Their advantage is speed, not strength. If you approach them, they will move back, and I doubt even a silver bullet would kill them. What kills them is white ash that is blessed. Whatever weapon you use has to be coated in the blessed ash. Only then can they be harmed. The worst part of it is the ritual to become a walker. Not only do you sacrifice the closest person to you, you sacrifice an infant as well. When they do this, they lose their humanity. I have a walker lurking in our neighborhood, so I found a wonderful young Apache who answered my questions honestly. I was afraid, but now that I know about them, I have no fear of them. I need to make some white ash and give it to all of my neighbors. It has stopped bothering me, but has moved down and is bothering the neighbors. I know this isn't much of a story. I do have better stories, and I will send them, I promise. This is my first communication to you. I'm Desiree L., and you always have permission to use my name. Stay wonderful, and sleep well.